I guess because it's my channel, it says waiting on me as a host.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now can you guys? Let's see.
There
Okay.
we go.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's play this again.
Goodness and mercy. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow us. Shall follow us all the days. All the days.
Well, go ahead, Blanche. Kick it off.
I think Chad said it best, man. It's just a minstrel show. They on here just acting. It's a bad Tyler Perry revival scene from one of his movies, man. It's just horrible. Like, it's not even believable. Like, nobody believes it. Like, this is bad, man. And this guy they got, he's the new king. What's his name? I don't even know his name.
His name is Justin C. Pearson.
Justin Pearson.
Yeah. That's what I got to say. It's the Mantan show.
Mantan, all right, speak and eat. Oh, sleep and eat, my bad. Baby was called.
Nah, the whole thing really is a minstrel show. I mean, when you look at Oh Boy, you see the afro. He loves to wear dashikis, apparently. Whenever he gets up there and he speaks, I'm getting a little feedback, by the way. I don't know if that's just me or if the audience is getting that as well.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay.
Let's see.
But it's very evident that he's trying to be a Black Panther, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, an African, all that rolled into one, and it's very off-putting.
Mm-hmm.
A minstrel gumbo.
A minstrel gumbo.
Are you guys still getting feedback? Oh yeah, I think I do hear it.
Yes.
All right, y'all, bear with me. I don't even know how to fix that, honestly. Is the Chuck? Can you ask them or see if they're hearing it as well?
Yeah, chat. They can hear the feedback too.
Okay.
How are you communicating, Chuck? I don't see how.
Talking about with the chat.
You on YouTube?
Yeah.
Is your audio down on YouTube, Chuck?
Try it now. Like, say something.
Hello. Yeah, I'm still hearing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does somebody not have like headphones on or something, or?
I had my headphones on. I took them off to see if that was better, but I don't have anything playing in my background.
Okay.
And Blanche, you don't either?
No, I have everything is down. Or should I say off?
Oh, is it gone? Is that better? No, I still hear it. I don't know. I don't even know what to do.
I don't hear anything, so I must.
Okay. So should we just keep going let's keep going until we try to figure it out? I have a real problem with this. I mean, I'm talking about a problem that literally vexes my spirit because number one, you're playing around with God, all of that hooping and hollering, you're tuning up, you're doing all of this stuff. in the name of, you're calling on the name of Christ. You're literally invoking God's name, and you're playing a role. You're playing around with God's with his people. You're using his name to emotionalize this event to get people on your side. And I just find it disgusting, honestly. I really do. And this whole scene, as we go on, you're going to see all of this is connected to Black liberation theology. This whole idea that was brought forth by James H. Cone in the 60s during the civil rights, after the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. This guy, Dr. James H. Cone, wrote this book called Black Power, Black Liberation and Black Power and Black Liberation Theology. I think that's the name of the book. And it has, the goal was to transform how the gospel was presented. It was to show that the oppression and the struggle of Black people was tied directly to the cross. He later on wrote a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. So that's how blasphemous this dude was, and how so many Black people just bought into this idea, hook, line, and sinker, and without any question. There was no question about it. Feel free to add to that while I still try to work on this audio.
You work on the audio. I'll just say that James Cone, yeah, he is considered the father of Black liberation theology, but even Cone himself accredited his ideas to older pastors from the 19th century, as a matter of fact, who were in fact Black. There was one Cincinnati pastor named Peter Clark, who came out as a subscribed socialist. As a matter of fact, he was a member of the Socialist Labor Party. And there was one other, I'm trying to remember, but there were a couple other Black pastors who considered themselves to be socialists, again, way back in the 19th century. But, Cone was riding that whole radical wave and fervor of the 1960s, this tying together of the Black church and Marxism. But of course, it is sort of crept up from Central America, from Peru and Colombia, from Catholic theologians, the likes of Oscar Romero, and a man who is sort of considered the father of liberation theology as a whole, not simply Black liberation theology, but liberation theology as a whole. And that, of course, is a man by the name of Gustavo Gutierrez, who I think he's almost 100 years old and he's still alive. As a matter of fact, he is a professor emeritus at Notre Dame as we speak.
Oh,
He's
wow.
still teaching theology at Notre Dame. So I want to throw that in there before we get rolling.
Yeah. I didn't know about the liberation theology. I didn't know that had started, I think it back in like Latin America or something like that, like the Latin America. I just learned about that. So it's funny how all of this stuff, even like critical race theory, at first it was critical theory, then legal theory, it comes over to the United States. This whole thing was liberation theology. Now it's Black liberation theology. All of this stuff still ties back to Marxism, communism.
But what people need to understand also is that there's tinges of liberation theology in the Catholic Church by way of the current Pope and other, previous popes. And then not only that, but when you look at liberation theology or Black liberation theology here in the United States, the prerequisite to that is the social gospel, the so-called social gospel, which was preached not only by MLK, but also MLK Sr. And so this idea of the gospel being not about the salvation of the individual from sin to life, but rather um, the speaking truth to power, as it were, to the government on behalf of the so-called marginalized. And so it's not so much about the liberation of the individual from their own sin, but rather the liberation of the classes to bring them to what these so-called theologians um, regard as freedom vis-a-vis Marxism.
Yeah. You finished, Chad?
Yeah.
I just want to throw that other name out there that I was thinking of that James Cone himself references as being, inspirations for him. And it's another pastor. His name is George Washington Woodbey. And the Woodbey is spelled Woodbey. But like Chad just said, a lot of these liberation theology ideas come from the social gospel ideas, because it's odd, because in the 1800s you did have a lot of religious figures, like when Chad and we just did a YouTube live a couple of days ago, just us two, and I brought up a man named John Humphrey Noyes. John Humphrey Noyes was a man of the cloth, and he would become the architect or the brainchild of a socialist community in Oneida, New York. And there was another man who, again, started off as somewhat of a theologian named Robert Owen in the 1800s. And he started up a socialist utopia, as they called them back then, these utopian societies in Indiana, a city known as New Harmony. Even if you go to New Harmony, Indiana today, I mean, they still, sort of give you an idea of the founding of New Harmony, and they sort of give Robert Owen the credit for starting the community in Indiana. So, like Chad said, I just wanted to pair it on that and kind of reinforce what Chad just said about the social gospel. Social gospel was prevalent all throughout the 1800s. And these socialist ideas, we look at it as secularism, atheism, and it is. But again, a lot of these socialist ideas in America started with men who were religious figures.
I think it's funny.
Yeah, I definitely second what Chuck just said, and I will just kind of cap it by saying that if the Apostle Paul was here, he would say that it's no gospel at all. The social gospel, quote unquote gospel, Black liberation theology, these are no gospels at all. These are demonic. This is yet another example of Satan coming as an angel of light and using religious sounding, spiritual sounding rhetoric and calling it, liberation theology or social gospel. Unfortunately, a lot of Black churches are preaching it. You saw an example of it in that video clip that you just played, and it's purely demonic. And I would go on to say that when you look at other religions around the world, be it Hinduism, be it Islam, be it Mormonism, they are in the same vein as the so-called liberation theology and the social gospel, in that it's one of the many ways that Satan uses to make you think that you're hyper spiritual, make you think that you're on this journey or what have you, when in reality you're on your way to the pit of the hell because you're believing in something other than Christ. And so I know that's a bold statement, but I stand by it 100%.
Well,
I agree.
I agree. I would venture to say that the gospel is the only religion that doesn't put you in right standing automatically. It's more or less you have to earn it. It's kind of like when it comes to the faith, you have to study to show yourself approved. You have to walk by faith and not by sight. there's requirements to get to a level where you can even be seen as just a filthy rag, so to speak. Like you never actually attain what you're trying to attain. You never reach the level. You're constantly carrying your cross and you're constantly working and growing. This I guess liberation theology automatically puts black people in the moral hierarchy. Because you're black, you're automatically right. Because Christ was black, white people are bad, so you automatically are in the right position. You don't have to actually work to attain anything. Your work is done by fighting against white people, not necessarily Satan. And I guess it would make sense for them to say that the white man is the devil because now that's your adversary. But the Bible says that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, so that's automatically going against the scriptures anyway. But this guy has this quote I want to read. Cone wrote, "I was on a mission to transform self-loathing Negro Christians into black-loving, revolutionary disciples of the Black Christ. Nevertheless, the Black church, despite its failures, gives black people a sense of worth." I just think it's funny the way he calls the Negro Christian self-loathing.
And he wants to transform, you know?
Keisha,
Yes.
to really get a full understanding or a fuller understanding of James Cone and what he believed, I think the quote that Lance just quoted pretty much hits it on a nail. But there's another book that he wrote called My Soul Looks Back. And he spends a great deal of time in that book talking about how Marxism basically reinforces Christianity. And he says that there is a marriage to be had between Marxism and Christianity.
Wow.
He says that the European gospel or the white gospel is in itself heretical to the gospel, and that, to Blanche's point, black people, because they are a kind of deity, because they're on the right side of morality, is the true gospel. And so the man was basically blasphemous through and through. He, of course, was the one of the professors at Union Theological Seminary, which Cornell West currently teaches at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, again, all of this is, and I think it's worth mentioning too that even what's his name, the guy who tried to kill Hitler.
The guy who tried to kill Hitler?
Bonhoeffer.
Oh.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Okay.
What's his
Yeah.
name?
Well, he's yeah.
Is that Operation
Dietrich.
Valkyrie?
Is it Dietrich? Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Have
Okay.
any of you heard that name before?
Yeah. I have.
Yeah, but even he subscribed to some tinges of liberation theology. He's another one that's worth looking into. When you look at Adam Clayton Powell Jr., he was a senator, I think one of the first black senators out of Harlem in the 1920s and 30s. He preached the social gospel too. But again, one of the things that all of these people have in common is that they're atheists. To the extent that they are willing to get up there and preach a sermon and play a role, all it is a power move. That's literally all it is. They don't believe in the gospel. They don't believe in God. This Justin Pearson guy out of Tennessee, he does not believe in God. He's an atheist. But again, his father is a pastor. So just like Martin Luther King, he grew up in the church. He grew up with a front row seat, seeing how black preaching is done. So he got that down to a T. And when it came time for him to get up and to bum rush the House session there in Tennessee, he gave that speech. And now you have all these black fools on black Twitter talking about this is a great orator. And when I see people saying stuff like that, the thought that comes to my mind is, wow, maybe there is no hope for these people.
Can I jump in?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, when Blanche was talking, I didn't hear echo, but I don't know, Blanche figured out what
Yeah,
was going
Blanche got
on
it
on his end.
together.
Sorry, y'all, but I hope it's not too off-putting, but we're gonna try to push through anyway. Um, but I think something Chad just said that made me think about a man by the name of Earl Browder. Earl Browder was at one point the leader of the Communist Party USA. And depending on who you ask, Earl Browder had a very intimate relationship with FDR. And just go sort of set that aside for a second. But the reason why I brought up Earl Browder was also one of the architects and founders of the ACLU. Earl Browder was even involved in, believe it or not, the communist revolution in China in 1949. He was over there doing his work. But Earl Browder disclosed a tactic of the Comintern known as the policy of the outstretched hand. The outstretched hand. You see, when it came to communism and the Catholic Church, believe it or not, I mean, there was one point when the Catholic Church, or at least this was the belief of the Comintern, that the Catholic Church was the biggest obstacle to them succeeding in this international, this globalist workers' revolution that we call communism. And so the League of the Militant Atheists, right? The group. I remember I mentioned that to Keisha before. She cracked up laughing. She was like, "What? The League of the Militant Atheists? It doesn't get any more frank than that." But that's the group, co-founded by Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. But again, their overtly antagonistic attitudes toward religion was not helping them grow and expand their ranks. So, like Chad just said, that's what made me think about Earl Browder and outstretched hand, because their attitude became, okay, well, we'll just try and convince religious folks, particularly Catholics in the beginning, but it eventually moved on. It happened to a very high degree within the Methodist faith, but again, this was across the board. But they started out with Catholics, Italian Catholics, Irish Catholics, and whatnot, trying to appeal to their kind of blue collar working class sensibilities. That okay, I understand we're communists and we know that we have some choice things to say about religion, but trust me, just kind of link up with us for the time being, because for right now we do have mutual interests, and that mutual interest was the whole class antagonisms or perception or whatever. So, but eventually, if you link up with them long enough, the goal of the communists was to eventually turn you. But they wanted you in their midst first. They wanted you in their grasp. Because again, to be just out the gate overtly antagonistic towards religion was turning too many people off. And it just wasn't working. And eventually all these organizations, we see how from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and all these other organizations, and their the student wing of the SCLC, which was SNCC, it all kind of fell apart, or not so much fell apart, but it became more blatant and obvious by the 1960s. And I'm gonna pass it off, but like I think something Chad said too about never mind, it doesn't matter. Let me just quote this real quick, because since we quoting Cone, I want to quote him as well. Because Blanche just quoting, I want to quote him. So here's what one of Cone's quotes. He says that the Christian faith does not possess in its nature the means for analyzing the structure of capitalism. Marxism, as a tool of social analysis, can disclose the gap between appearance and reality, and thereby help Christians to see things how they really are. So again, according to Marx, he was an absolutist in terms of how he viewed his historicism, that it was material conditions that determined man's perception, and a man's very conception of knowledge is predicated upon his material conditions. And when I say his ideas, I'm talking about his religious ideas as well. So according to Cone, and according to anybody that clings to the liberationist heresy, your God, how you view God, how you perceive God, again, is going to be based upon your position within the social hierarchy. And so it isn't that man or individuals sin, the structure itself is sinful. Big banks, so you have to destroy these institutions in order to free man of his sin. So I know I just said a mouthful, but anyway,
Yeah.
I'll pass it off.
No, I think that is it's funny how all of this goes back to communism. That's what blows my mind, and that's why I find with this young dude, Justin Pearson and Justin Jones and that Gloria lady, what they're doing, why I find it so dangerous, because these are the types of movement. They have a lot of support. Somebody commented under one of my videos that I did, they were like, these boys are, they're gonna be big, and there's nothing you can do to stop their shine. And I was like, well, I do think you got Kamala Harris coming down, Stacey Abrams chiming in, and Barack Obama chiming in. You got all these people. Oprah's gonna put some money, and she's gonna chime in. Tyler Perry has chimed in. These are the types of things that can amend a constitution to take your gun rights. This is the same type of thing that amended the Constitution for civil rights, that got us every civil rights problem today was from that movement. And when I say civil rights problem, I mean all of these other groups that have latched on to the original, so-called civil rights movement. And look at the destruction. The trans stuff, the LG, all of these, Black people not just going to the government, wanting to be more dependent, all of these things. This is all stemming from the Civil Rights Act. This is yet another movement that I think if we do not talk about this in the right way and get people to understand what exactly is happening, this is going to be a problem.
Hey, Keisha.
Okay.
Oh no, I promise y'all. I know I just said a mouthful last time, but there's one part I left out, and that's what it was that Chad said that made me think about this. So again, I want to go back. I've been referencing this book a lot. I want to show it again. This is I Might Not Get There With You, The True Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., written by Michael Eric Dyson. Reminds me, Chad, again, we were talking on the last live here, and I did, just talking about books and how sometimes it's difficult to reference a book because, Michael Eric Dyson, you want people to read it, but it's just like, But going back to what I said about Cone was pretty much saying that, spirituality, that's one thing. But reality as it stands, Marx properly understood the socio-economic situation. And so Christians, it would behoove them to learn Marx so that they could see the world for what it really is. Here's what Dyson, just a couple of sentences, what Dyson says about King and his Marxism. Dyson says of King never claimed to be a Marxist. Even if he had, it would by no means certify his communist standing. Many Marxists and pro-Marxists have long since eschewed communism. They value the profound insights on class and economic inequality that Marx offered without embracing the political party he favored. In the same way that King was not a Hindu, even though he was an advocate of Gandhian nonviolence. King can be said to have been a radical figure who appreciated Marx's insights about class and economic inequality, and more important, put them into practice without being a communist. So Dyson admits that yeah, he wasn't a communist, he wasn't Marx, but he appreciated Marx's profound insights on class and economics. So there you have it. Which begs the question, I mean, are Marx's insights on class and economics profound? Begs the question.
But even still, because that's a great quote to quote there, Chuck. But even still, Dyson himself is not an authority on this because he himself did not actually know personally Martin Luther King. He studied him, but he did not personally know him. However, when you consider the words of those who actually did know him, who admitted to Martin Luther King talking about his infatuation for Marxism and that he himself is a Marxist, and how he would never talk about it in public. I take their word for it more so than Dyson's. But to your point, Chuck.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, but to your point, even Dyson himself, which I think the quote reveals, is showing how MLK had a favoritism toward Marxism.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the whole point. I mean, they're trying to kind of lean into it without fully sort of committing it. It's just like, you see the tyranny, the abuse, the gulags, the starvations, the deaths, the executions. It's just like, I'm not with communism. I'm not with the, but I appreciate karma. It's just, again, it's being lukewarm. He knew, and don't get me wrong, especially those of you who have been listening to Chad and I and Blanche and Keisha. We've been flat out. I'm not trying to make excuses for MLK at all. We all know exactly who he was and what he was all about. But they're trying to admit without admitting.
Is the echo gone? Hello?
I had another James Cone quote. I remember Chad mentioned these people are atheists, but this is funny that he would even say this. He said the belief that the soul continues its existence after the dissolution of the body is a matter of philosophical or theological speculation rather than a simple faith, and is accordingly nowhere expressly taught in Holy Scripture. So for him to say that there's basically he's saying there's no afterlife is totally atheist. I'm surprised he didn't get called to task for this quote. This is crazy.
They're not going to. Y'all can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. They're not going to because they all agree they don't want those types of things to get out. I was reading more about like Stanley Livingston and all of these people who were behind Martin Luther King and who were pushing him. When the FBI was starting to get more involved, they were looking at Stanley Livingston and they were like, yo, this dude is a problem. This dude is a known communist. And John F. Kennedy, instead of like letting the FBI do what they needed to do to get rid of these people, he was going to Martin Luther King like, yo, look, you got to get rid of Stanley. And Martin Luther King was like, I really don't want to. I don't want to. It wasn't until it was like he had to go to him several times like, yo, homeboy, you cannot be around these people. The approach was not, hey, if this dude is a communist, this is a problem. We will shut this whole thing down. It was more sympathetic. Like, could you do me a favor and not, let this guy be around? It was like you would think that there would have been a because of the destruction of communism, because of these dangerous ideas coming into a nation like America, you would think that the United States government would have been extremely forceful and saying, F around and find out, like that kind of yo, we're not tolerating this. But it wasn't. It was like, well, could you do us a favor and just not really like hang around with the communists, Martin Luther? I mean, it was almost like they were more afraid of him than Martin was, of the consequences. And then so I think that because there was no real pushback when these open communists started to infiltrate these groups, it's like game on. If you're not going to stop it at the height, you're not going to stop it. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody was going to really ever do anything about it. And they knew that. And so they weren't going to go after James Cone. They weren't going to go after, I mean, Columbia University had brought the Frankfurt School over to America and nobody said a word. Nobody said a word. And so it's wild.
Do you all think it's like naivety, arrogance, like to think that even though someone is common, like what is their mind, like what is JFK's mindset if he's not pressuring King to get rid of a communist? Like, is he thinking it won't be that big? Is he thinking the American public won't accept it? Like what are these people thinking? Because I kind of feel like they felt like America would never become communist, like it would never happen.
Well, I found out yesterday that America, Chuck, you will like this. They executed who are them people? There was a couple because
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg.
There you go. Yo, at one point in time, America was not having it with no communists. Huh?
I knew Chuck was gonna know it. He was like, "You gonna like this, Chuck?" And I'm like, "He probably already knows."
Right. So there was a point in time America was not having it with communists because they knew the destruction that it could bring. But I don't think it was. I wouldn't say it was being naive. I would let Chuck kind of take that one. I wouldn't say it's naivete. I wouldn't.
Nah,
or
well,
arrogance, or arrogance.
Right. It's weird because Blanche might get a kick out of this because there was another man who was high up on the FBI watch list, right beside Levinson, or maybe right below him, and that was a man by the name of Jack O'Dell. Jack O'Dell was a communist. Jack O'Dell was black. And when it was brought to King's attention, specifically about Levinson and O'Dell, O'Dell was told explicitly by King, "You're done. You're gone." Levinson, he had a harder time getting rid of, I think, and Chad can correct me if I'm wrong, but, Levinson volunteered, said, "You know what? I'll do you one, better, and I'll sever ties," because King couldn't bring himself to part from Levinson. But Jack O'Dell, he dropped him like he was hot. And Jack O'Dell said that he made a public statement after his dismissal from the SCLC. He said that what led to his dismissal on behalf of King is this anti-communist fervor in American politics and in American culture. And he said the point of it wasn't justified, of course, in his opinion, being the communist that he was. But he said that what the anti-communist attitude in America is doing, it is inhibiting America to deal with its social questions, with its economic problems. Because the left has this sort of built-in meta-narrative that that Marxism is the only way to view, economics, even though we know that, Marxism as an ideology and a system is far.
Communist subversive activities has developed into hysterical frenzy, which grows daily.
It's far deeper than just economics. But, anti-communism is, again, meant to protect the status quo. It's just like, in any excuse, just like Frank Marshall Davis said that the anti-communism was a ploy that was being perpetrated by way of the Ku Klux Klan in order to, again, you know, exercise their racist attitudes against black. That's so to be, and this is the quote of Frank Marshall Davis: "To be anti-communist is to be anti-black." That's a quote from Frank Marshall Davis.
Wow.
And Jack Odell had the same attitude.
To be anti-communist is anti-black. That makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry, I'm still trying to get this worked out with the sound. But it makes a lot of sense. Can y'all hear me still?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, you can't hear me?
I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, let's let me see. Let's go ahead and play this other clip.
Are called by God to plunge themselves into the world on behalf of those who are voiceless and hurt. The great Russian writer Dostoevsky said, quote, "There is only one thing I dread, not to be worthy of my suffering," unquote. As I reflected on that saying in relation to black suffering, I said, there is only one thing I dread, not to be worthy of the life that the suffering of my black ancestors have made possible for me. I wanted to be a faithful witness to the redemptive meaning of their nearly 400 years of suffering. I am here at Union Seminary today because my ancestors suffered and died for me and for many others like me.
Hold on, Keisha. Have y'all seen that movie Mars Attacks?
Who was it called?
Mars Attacks.
Yes.
So he sounds like the little aliens on that movie Mars Attacks. And not only that, but he's not very bright. Again, like James Cone, and I know Keisha, you said earlier that he's kind of like the father of Black liberation theology. That's true if we're talking about optics, but he's not the kind of brain trust for a lot of the things that he taught and talked about. He had a whole slew of white and Jewish Marxists behind him who were feeding him these talking points, and he was basically the kind of empty suit who would then disseminate them in university. It's important to note that the current Georgia senator, Raphael Warnock, was also a student of his at Union Theological Seminary. A lot of your so-called black pastors, your mainstream kind of front-facing black pastors, may have basically gleaned some kind of insight or some kind of knowledge from James Cone, but it's not essentially his as much as it is his kind of puppeteers and overseers. But you can tell by listening to him that he's not very bright. He's yelling into the microphone. I mean, if there's a microphone right in front of your face, there's no need to yell, right? So he doesn't have all of his wits about him, and that's just putting it nicely.
Yeah, I was gonna say I see why he didn't go into preaching, because that's real. That's hard to listen to, man. He been ran off the congregation.
Blanche, Your laughing is making me laugh.
Glad you never seen them before. You act like it's your first time seeing them.
I never seen it.
I didn't understand what he meant by he did not want to be, he didn't want to not be worthy. I didn't understand that whole thing. I'm going to play it one more time.
Oh, Keisha, please. Oh, no, come on.
Okay, all
Go
right,
ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, let's see.
Christians are called by God to plunge themselves into the world on behalf of those who are voiceless and hurt. The great Russian writer Dostoevsky said, quote, "There is only one thing I dread, not to be worthy of my suffering," unquote. As I reflected on that saying in relation to black suffering, I said, there is only one thing I dread, not to be worthy of the life that the suffering of my black ancestors have made possible for me. I wanted to be a faithful witness to the redemptive meaning of their nearly 400 years of suffering. I am here at Union Seminary today because my ancestors suffered and died for me and for many others like me.
I'm sorry, man. Listen, I understand black folks getting tricked by King and Barack Obama, but not this guy. I'm sorry, not this
Look,
guy. No.
Glad. I thought it was just B. I know sometimes, look, y'all, I'm a part of Detroit public school system. I got a little urban diction, a little slang. Sometimes I'm a little off in my pronunciation. But did this man say Dostoevsky? God,
He said Dusty Rhodes.
Dostoevsky. Right, Dusty American Dream, Dusty Road.
Dusty Rhodes.
Dostoevsky? I don't think that's how you say his name, man.
Listen, man.
Oh,
You
my
don't have
goodness.
you don't have to be of substance, clearly. Because I think Chad had said this in a live couple weeks ago. If you ever listened to Barack Obama, he sounds great, but he was never really saying anything. You don't have to. I read Jason Riley. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He wrote a book called Stop Helping Us. And he had a quote from Dr. Carol Swain, and she revealed in the book that there was a Black congressional member of Congress who said, she wouldn't say who the congressman was, but she was quoting him verbatim, and she said, if you're a Black Democrat, you can be accused of doing bad things to children. I'll just say that so we don't get banned or taken down. It starts with an R. Doing that to children, and Black people will still elect you. That was a Congress member told her that. So it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you do. As long as you're Black and a Democrat, check. Even if you're white, as long as you're a Democrat, doesn't even matter.
Right.
Biden up there calling Black people roaches, talking about he don't want their kids to go to school. If you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. All of these things, as long as you are signifying the struggle, as long as you are signifying, some Black oppression, and, as long as you're doing that, that's all it takes.
Hey, Keisha.
Yes.
So, what is your mic plugged into?
Well, I've been going back and forth. I'm like hearing you through my headphone, and then Let me see. Let me if I take that off.
Oh, that
Is
might
that
be
better?
it. That might be it.
Uh, is it still a echo? I can still hear an echo. I don't know. Let's see. Speakers. I know it's annoying to me too.
Well, while you're doing that, I'm sending you a clip right now. Um, I thought of it when Blanche asked the question that he asked earlier. I don't know if it will throw off the show if you played this clip. I just sent it to you, but I think it goes back to the conversation that we were having earlier about JFK and the FBI, the CIA, and other government officials, and whether or not they believed that Marxism, communism, leftism would take a toll on America eventually. And I think the clip that I just sent you pretty much answers that question if when you have time. It's like a 45-second clip.
Hey y'all, do y'all mind while Keisha trying to work out the technical kinks over there? If I tell y'all this quick story about Cornell West while I'm thinking about it,
Go
because
ahead.
okay, so we brought up Union, and yeah, Cornell West, he currently teaching there. Last time I checked, and this is interesting. Not many people know about this story. That because when I think about liberation theology, I also think about the Nation of Islam. I think about Timothy Drew's movement in the Moorish Science Temple. Think about all that. And
Hebrew
my
Israelites.
next, yeah, my next YouTube discussion I'm going to do coming up, I'm going to cover a lot of that stuff. I'm going to cover a lot of the theosophical new thought, occult origins of, a lot of these movements. It's going to be great. But when Cornell West was just 19 years old, he was as an undergraduate student at Harvard, I believe, and he was the head of like their Black Student Union, and he invited a minister from the Nation of Islam by the name of George X to come and speak. And at the time, Cornel West was just 19 years old, and this guy George X, he's preaching and he's just doing his thing, and he's ripping into Malcolm X. And I know Blanche, you was doing some stuff covering Malcolm X and Nation of Islam and Farrakhan a couple months ago, and he's just going into Malcolm, ripping into him. And Cornell said, as he sat back and listened, he was getting more and more frustrated because of what they were saying about Malcolm. And he said to himself, man, if this dude says one more thing about Malcolm X, I'm going to check him. So he made another disparaging comment about Malcolm. At this point, Malcolm was dead. And Cornell leaped up, say, listen, man, how dare you disrespect this brother who did so much for the black race and our cause and so on and so forth. Guy George X told him, listen, man, kind of like, remember when that clip of Farrakhan saying, what business is it of yours how we deal with the traitor? Talking about Malcolm. George X told Cornell West, he warned him, listen, bro, have a seat, fall back. You don't know what you're doing. And Cornell West bucked up again, challenged him again, bro. But you talking about Malcolm. Now, mind you, George X, he got the fruit of Islam, which is the military wing of Nation of Islam. This guy George X stood up from his podium and said, listen, young man, you say one more thing about Malcolm, and you won't make it out of here alive.
Is Ronald Reagan, who says,
He said, you say one more thing about Malcolm, you won't make it out of here alive. And if you do, you won't last 5 days. From that point forward, Cornel West was in a mad scramble, trying to make amends with the Nation of Islam because they had effectively put a fatwa on his life. They were going to kill him. And Cornel West, we know this because Cornel West tells the story himself. Got all this black, bliggity black coming together and this and that. Okay. Try the Nation of Islam. They were going to kill Cornel West.
Hold on. So Cornel West had a speaker there speaking
Yep.
about Malcolm.
The guy George X. I'm not sure exactly what George X came there to speak about, but he was a popular minister for the Nation of Islam at the time, and he came to Harvard to speak at Cornel West's invitation. And while he was speaking, he was saying some things about Malcolm. I don't know what he was saying, but he was saying things about Malcolm that was making Cornel West upset. And Cornel West at 19 stepped up to challenge the minister. And the minister said, bruh, you try to defend Malcolm one more time and try to, question my authority, I'm going to kill you. He threatened him in front of everybody. You won't make it out of here alive. And if you do, you're not going to last 5 days. Eventually, the matter was taken care of. I guess Cornell, he issued an apology, whatever happened, because I think one of students that he was close with at Harvard was an actual member of the Nation of Islam, and somehow word went up the chain of command that Cornell wanted to make amends. But yeah, he thought the Nation of Islam was going to kill him. And this is the same Cornel West that even after that, still to this day, defends the Nation of Islam, Farrakhan and everything else associated with them, after they were going to kill him. True story. Cornel West is the one who told the public about this. That's how we know about it. He disclosed this story himself.
All right, let's see.
So there you go for black solidarity.
I would hesitate, or I would not like to see any political party outlawed on the basis of its political ideology, because we've spent 170 years in this country on the basis that democracy is strong enough to stand up and fight for itself against the inroads of any ideology, no matter how much we may disagree with it. But at the same time, I never, as a citizen, want to see our country become so, or become urged by either fear or resentment of this group that we ever compromise with any of our democratic principles through that fear or resentment.
Well, we agree
I
with
still
that.
think that democracy can do it.
We agree with it. We agree. Thank you very much.
Now, who is that? I'm going to play it one more time.
That's the gift. That's the gift.
Next on the list of witnesses is Ronald Reagan, who says,
I will be frank with you that as a citizen, I would hesitate, or I would not like to see any political party outlawed on the basis of its political ideology, because we've spent 170 years in this country on the basis that democracy is strong enough to stand up and fight for itself against the inroads of any ideology, no matter how much we may disagree with it. But at the same time, I never, as a citizen, want to see our country become so, or become urged by either fear or resentment of this group that we ever compromise with any of our democratic principles through that fear or resentment.
Well, we agree
I
with
still
that.
think that democracy can do it.
We agree with it. We agree. Thank you very much.
So that's a young Ronald Reagan. That's 1947. And he, along with a lot of other Hollywood actors, actresses, musicians, were brought before Congress to be questioned as to their American bona fide or their patriotic bona fides and their thoughts on communism. And you had some actors, some musicians, some actresses who took a strong stance against communism, a very no-nonsense stance against communism. And then you had a lot of folks, just like Ronald Reagan, who were like, oh, well, we should just treat them just like anybody else. There's nothing wrong. I still think democracy will win. Little did they know that all the while, because by this time, a lot of the professors from the Frankfurt School were already making their way to the United States. But while they were being naive about, oh, democracy will win, the Marxists had already had a plan to, in a sense, infiltrate America's schools and universities and, also Hollywood, which is why all these actors and actresses and stuff are being questioned in the first place, because Congress knew that they were infiltrating Hollywood as far back as the 1910s. And so, again, to go back to Blanche's question as to whether or not they were just, naive, or whether they, whatever the case may be, you had a lot of people, obviously because Ronald Reagan would go on to be the president of the United States. You know what I mean? You had a lot of people who did kind of treat communists with kid gloves because they believe so truly in the American people, and that the American people would never let this happen. But here we are. You know what I mean? And so I do believe that they should have taken a stronger stance against communism. But then again, it does bring up a fair point as to, like, okay, how much is too much in terms of fighting against, communist ideology spreading or running rampant in the United States? How much is too much? Because we do, after all, have the First Amendment, right? However, what is the balance between treason? Because communism is treason. It does seek to bring America to an end as we know it. So what's the line between treason and honoring one's First Amendment right? I think that's a conversation that needs to be had.
I said it.
Go ahead.
No, I said it before. I used the movie as an example. I call it the Batman Joker paradox. When Falcone told him, Batman, to the criminal underworld, we hip to you. We know your game. You got rules. The Joker, he ain't got no rules. We're afraid of him. We're not afraid of you anymore. It's just like, how do you deal with an enemy with no scruples? But the left will do and say anything. Here we are still trying to operate in principle and defeat them at the same time. And I told you guys that I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I have the answer yet. But like Chad just said, it does warrant questioning. At what point do we cease to be free? At what point, do we just go full Franco, or like Augusto Pinochet in Chile? These were fascist right wingers, but they got heavy handed with their citizenry because they were hell bent on stomping out communism, even if they had to get totalitarian. And so we look at men like Franco and Pinochet, they're kind of like villains to history. But again, it's devoid of some context because they were hell bent on not allowing communism to take over their countries. And depending on who you ask, when you ask them Spanish folks, or the people who are well versed on Spanish history, particularly that period, they will tell you that the people of Spain, many of them view Franco as a hero, not as a villain.
This begs another question. Well, not so much a question, but I think everything that you just said, Chuck, brings up another thing that everyone must consider, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the show. I think Keisha mentioned it, where you have everybody coming out of the woodworks, Obama, Tyler Perry, everyone, to uplift this Justin Pearson as some kind of hero. This is how heroes are made and villains are made. The fact is, to the extent that you have all these people in position of influence, whether they be a celebrity, a politician, whomever, again, these are the ones who get to decide who is the hero and who is the villain. And to the extent that you have people historically who have stamped out communism within their own country, we are trained and conditioned to look at such people as villains. And to the extent that you have people among us who are social justice warriors or what have you, we are conditioned to look at these people as heroes. When you look at what you and I talked about last week, Blanche, or not Blanche, but Chuck, when you and I went live, you may remember that one of the people that came up, one of the names that came up was Ma Rainey, who was having a lesbian orgy there in Harlem and was making such a loud noise that the neighbors called the police. And so when the police showed up, they grabbed hold of her and they arrested her, and they couldn't charge her, so they released her. And after that, she wrote a song called Prove It On Me Blues, and basically bragging about getting away with crime. And the song was the #1 selling song of 1928. And I say that was the original drill music, in the sense of you had this black blues artist who was bragging about a crime that she got away with, and it went bonkers as far as sales are concerned. So that happened in 1928. What did Netflix do a year or two ago? They made a movie glorifying Ma Rainey, starring none other than Queen Latifah. And so again, these are the people, the gatekeepers, who get to pick and choose who the heroes should be and who the villains should be. And we, as gullible, disinterested consumers, we buy it hook, line, and sinker, and we don't stop to think about, well, hold on, is there a game being played on me in terms of who I should emulate and who I should hate? If that makes sense.
Make perfect sense.
But I would say this though, as far as about the fight against communism, to me, it's not a fair fight because back then it wasn't everything supporting it. Like now, it's television, it's film, it's music, it's like everybody supporting it. So it's kind of a lopsided fight. So the actual fight against communism has to be something extreme because if you think about it, everything supports it. Even this guy is the Justin Pearson guy. Like, think about it. Everybody supporting him. 99% of the media, the black celebrities, like literally everybody is saying this guy is the next guy. He's the guy that's going to fight for freedom. Even though his message is all destructive and everything, how do we combat that if everything else supports it? Like, to me, it's not even a fair fight anymore. And when Ronald Reagan was speaking, I know he's thinking like, there's no way the American people are going to let this stuff fly. But they would let it fly if everybody that controls the information to the American people supports communism. Even when Chuck mentioned that quote that somebody said that to be anti-communist, to be anti-black, I just put the quote in and it's literal organizations, articles, like it's just so much stuff coming up with literally saying anti-communism is anti-black. So now you got the black folks on board. It's just like the fight's too much. There has to be an extreme reaction to communism because just sitting back trying to play fair is not going to work because they don't. Think about Joe Biden. Joe Biden said, you know, your body autonomy is not your own anymore. Like he said, then he said, I want to make sure the children are able to get transit. Like this kind of stuff is crazy. This is the president speaking. So this whole communist, I guess, eat the rich, everybody on all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I just feel like nowadays it's just not a fair fight, in my opinion. It's just not.
Yeah, I feel like God, this echo is driving me freaking nuts. It's permeated so much of society that there has to be, and I hate to use the word revolution because it's so associated with communism, but unless and until there is like a revolution of people against this stuff, it's going to continue. I think there should be government taking action like they did before in the past with what are their names? Ethelbergs? The two that got executed?
Well, they were accused of espionage.
They were accused of espionage.
So espionage is different than trying to influence people. Because the thing is, we do live in a constitutional republic. And as such, if enough states want to amend the Constitution, they have the ability to do so. So it becomes a question as to what ideals across the land will win the day. And communists understand this. And this is why they are vying for jobs as teachers in your local schools, as academics, as radio producers, and like they're. I mean, George Soros, he's literally funding all of the, you know, to Blanche's point, all of the institutions where information disseminates, because they understand if you can win in the court of public opinion, you can create popular opinion that will favor amendments to the Constitution that are Marxist oriented. And so, again, they are playing the long game. And it's not like to say like, okay, we need the government to go after these people. To that point, I do get what, you know, Ronald Reagan is saying, because it's like, well, if we're going to mobilize the government to go after people who we disagree with politically, what's to stop those same people from going after us when they get the upper hand in power. So that's not the way that you want to go about it, because it creates a kind of precedence where you can be on the wrong side of that. So it seems that the only way to really fight this ideology is within the culture, because it becomes a tug of war of information, more so than I'm going to legally go after you, such as Obama did, where he was sending the IRS after people like Dinesh D'Souza and other people whose political stance he disagreed with, right? So you don't want to mobilize the government, because, again, that can be used against you. It depends upon who has the upper hand in power during a given election, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there has to be some sort of action because it's too big. Like, I don't know, rooting out the teachings, like critical race theory, like that communism is good. My daughter was like, her teacher was talking about communism, and the kid asked, "What is communism?" And she's like, "Oh, it's just sharing land." Like, what? Like, this is in eighth grade. She was in eighth grade or ninth grade. I'm sorry. This is high school.
Right. They're just sharing land. And what did I say on the live? Keisha, you wasn't on it. It was me, Blanche, Ted, and Cool Heem. Again, when you start talking about sharing land, you think about this glorious time in the Americas before they were tainted by colonists, when they were all kind of living colonial, communally. You see, sharing land like the Native Americans did. And then again, with the Howard Zenification of American education, you hear all this stuff about how Native American culture. Not to change the subject, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but because you're talking about a lot of history. But they also talk about how Native American culture was superior because of how they treated their women, and how the women were on par as far as power is concerned with the
They were
men in
literal
their
savages.
society. Right. So and I said that. I said that in the live we had with Kuhim a couple of days ago. But anyway, that's part of their whole thing about trying to rearrange and tell this bogus dim-witted story as far as our history is concerned, because it feeds their modern day ideology and politics, you know.
Can I say one more thing before we change the subject, if that's what we're about to do? So, like what the point that Blanche made about in 1947, the culture being such to where everybody for the most part was patriotic. If you watch a lot of films from the 1940s going into the 1950s, if that's a barometer for what the kind of cultural sentiment is, Blanche is absolutely 100% right. If you look at, again, opinion polls on how people thought about things like sex and drugs and other kind of vices, there was no distinguishable difference between the youth society and the adult society, because most people were pretty much traditional and moral oriented when they looked at the world here in the West and in America in particular. However, I don't think it's entirely fair to say that their naivete was justified, because when you read the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx makes it clear as to what the agenda of communism is. And he literally says in the closing remarks that, let the bourgeois tremble at the I forget exactly how he worded it, but let the bourgeois and the ruling classes tremble at the rise of a proletariat. And then he says, let the workers of the world unite. And so he's very clear as to, I want to destroy everything that is, in a sense, Western, everything that is capitalism, and replace it with this new communist power. And then you have, too, the Russian Revolution of 1917 and how bloody and brutal that was. And so, again, Americans had no excuse for being naive to what the kind of threat that communism posed. And so it's just, when I look at people like Ronald Reagan in that clip, again, he did at that time have political aspirations, Um, you see JFK. Anybody who looks into JFK's background and his family's background, they were in bed with the communists as well. They were involved in organized crime and all sorts of other nefarious activities. Um, and so again, to me, I think that there's a bigger kind of underlying story as to why someone like a JFK or someone like a Ronald Reagan will kind of tiptoe around communism. Part of it is naivete, but another part of it is a little bit more nefarious.
I want to add some more context to that Reagan clip as well. Like Chad said, I don't know if Ronald Reagan specifically understood. I don't know how inclined and how well versed he was in Marxism Leninism, but he did know firsthand that the communists were beginning to sink their fangs into Hollywood. Uh, I'm trying to remember what year was that clip from that clip, but I think during that period, 47, 40. Okay, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I know at some point during that time, Ronald Reagan was president of the Screen Actors Guild. And, part of what changed his political attitude, because, he was considered like a neocon of his day. He was one of those FDR Democrats that became Republican during the Eisenhower years. But, part of what began to transform Ronald Reagan is what he saw going on in Hollywood. So he knew that there were communists all throughout Hollywood. But maybe, I don't know, he underestimated the threat. Maybe he had more faith in the American people than he should have. Maybe he didn't fully understand how destructive Marxism Leninism was. Not entirely sure, but yes, he knew. And around the same time, Humphrey Bogart, he headed up a committee known as the Committee for the First Amendment. Humphrey Bogart was sent to speak to Congress to say, this is all crazy, this is all nonsense, this is not happening. And again, what communists do, part of their popular front tactic, is they like to attach themselves to so-called civil liberties organizations. That's why they call themselves the Committee for the First Amendment. Now, let Bogart tell it, and I think Lucille Ball was also a part of the Committee for the First Amendment. They claim they had no idea that the Committee for the First Amendment was being used by the Communist Party to insulate or hide, within the American mainstream, because of course First Amendment, free speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and everything else. And so, what's the big deal? But Humphrey Bogart would later find out that many of the people that the government accused of being members of the Communist Party were in fact members of the Communist Party. And it came out during his hearings. And Humphrey Bogart was shocked. He couldn't believe it. Right? Wink, wink. I don't know. Again, because there was another member of the Communist Party. I forgot his wife's name, but his name is John Lear. He testified to Martin Dobbs, a Democrat of Texas, that Humphrey Bogart was a member of the Communist Party himself. Humphrey Bogart, along with another popular actor by the name of James Cagney. So I don't know. Chad may be able to weigh in on this or something, but I don't know if it was ever definitively proven that Humphrey Bogart was a communist, but there was suspicion swirling around him as well. So
Yeah.
it was going on back then.
And I quote this, and Chuck is right. I quote this interview all the time. I pulled a lot from it. It's the interview between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. And people are probably tired of hearing me talk about it. But again, it offers so much insight into the way that these people operate, because there's a point in the interview where James Baldwin says, yes, I was part of the Communist Party as a young man. Of course, you're not supposed to say that you're part of the Communist Party, right? And so what is he talking about? He's talking about the fact that whenever you do the bidding for the Communist Party, whether it be in literature, whether it be in academia, whether it be in social justice, whatever the case may be, you will be more beneficial if you don't out yourself as a communist. And in fact, there's a lot of people who call themselves anti-communist and wrote very forcefully against communism in public magazines and newspapers. All the while they were communists. And all of this is, again, it gets very convoluted and intertwined and complex, but you want to be looked at as someone who is pushing the cause of progressivism and equality, and not have that tied directly to communism. Because in a time where you had a lot of hostility among the American people against communism, you don't want to be connected to that party because you will be blackballed, ousted, dismissed, besmirched, and so on and so forth. And so there were a lot of people who were part of the Communist Party, but they didn't publicly announce that they were. And this is why McCarthy was doing what he was doing and trying to dig up anything that he can in terms of finding out just who in positions of influence were actually part of the Communist Party. It became very daunting and difficult work. And in some places he got, according to a lot of scholars, reckless. I don't know that he did. But it's just one of those things where it's like, this is something that you really have to really dig into and find out about. But there was something that Chuck said that reminded me. Oh yeah, I did want to respond to, I think it was Daniel Williams in the comment section. He says the communist Hollywood connection goes back to before World War I to Greenwich Village, New York. He's absolutely right. I encourage people to read a book called Movers and Shakers by what's her name? Mabel Dodge Lujan. She was an art patron in New York. She was an heiress. She had a lot of money. She bankrolled a lot of the kind of communist-esque art that came out of Hollywood and New York. She would have these kind of dinner parties where she would bring all these communists and socialists and union and birth control activists. She would bring all these people together and they would talk about ways in which to undermine the culture. And they succeeded in doing so. This is why she named her book Movers and Shakers, because the young folks who were just graduating from Ivy League schools who would go to her Greenwich Village apartment, they would grow up and they would go on to establish themselves in positions of influence, and they were the movers and shakers of society throughout the early 20th century. And they helped to, in a sense, radically shift the undergird of American culture and American society from being that of a Judeo-Christian undergird to more of a modern secularist humanist undergird. And so you can actually pinpoint a lot of the radical shift over the course of the 20th century to Greenwich Village, New York. So,
and I want to piggyback.
Hold on, Chuck. I just wanted to say, you said that was in 1947, so that was the first year that Reagan was president of the Screen Actors Guild. Was 1947.
Okay. I know it was somewhere around there. I wasn't sure. But I wanted to ask Chad or just make a statement more so because he brought up McCarthy and I almost called him Kevin. Joe McCarthy. They say he got reckless and, some of his allegations were incorrect. I'm using my phone to do this program with you guys, so I can't access it right now. But man, I have a whole laundry list of common people that were closely tied to the United States government. I mean, he was right more so than he was wrong, and more so than people would like to admit. But like I always say, it wasn't just a McCarthy thing, McCarthyism. That's not true. Democrats at the time were just as involved. You could say, well, they were just going through the motions. They didn't really care, but it was a bipartisan effort, to be fair. But again, you look at society today, it's just like, okay, Joe McCarthy, Republican, Republicans bad, and so McCarthyism was a terrible time in America, especially for the academy. But I just wanted to say that McCarthy, like Chad said, got a little reckless. I just wanted to also point out that McCarthy is said had a bit of a drinking problem, and the task again was so daunting that it really began to affect him. And his popularity began to wane because he did get a bit sloppy, and many people say that his lack of precision had a lot to do with his alcoholism. So I just want to point that out. I don't know if Chad knows anything about that. I don't even know if he heard me, but they said that McCarthy had issues with alcohol.
I heard you.
Yeah. So
I will say, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with America having like a bit of protectionism, like I think because like when you make something great, I think you should strive to protect it. I don't, I get, and it's kind of like it is a fine line. Like, how do you have individualism? How do you have, free thought and all these things when, when you want to encourage free thought and you want people to be, individually themselves, but it's like at the same time, it's like, yes, we want parents to ultimately be in control of their children's lives, how they want their children's lives to go, and parents have, but at the same time, we should be arresting parents and putting them in jail if they do bad things to their kids, so there is like, okay, there are clear lines that are crossed, even though, because people say that about, the parental rights movement that's happening. They're like, well, if you're claiming that you want parents to have basically like the first look and the last say, but you don't want parents to be able to transition their kids. It's like, yeah, because that's bad. And like, yeah, I don't want them to murder their kids either. But there are parents who do that. There are parents who do bad things. They're still human beings who sin. And speaking of sin and just this whole topic of Black liberation theology, none of this is tied. It's all tied to, I think Chuck had said it, the materialism of, this, what you have socially, what you can get from, politically, almost. And I think this is where this idea comes from, like that Black people can do no wrong, is because everything points away from Black people being responsible of any type of wrongdoing. Like there is no line that Black people can cross. Black people can't be racist. Black people shouldn't go to jail for, they're letting Black people out of jail for murder and all kind of stuff, giving them lighter sentences. They're doing it's this idea that Black people can do no wrong with the focus on only white people can commit sin, because the whole premise of Black liberation theology is so godless and so it's insulting to me. How dare you tie this to Christianity? Like, I don't like it. Stop it. It is not. It's so deceptive. It's so deceptive.
I think an important thing to point out, Keisha, because I don't think to this point that we have actually given a working definition of what liberation theology is, or what Black liberation theology is.
Oh, I did. I had that down. I just, with the sound thing, I got kind of off track. Sorry about that.
So I'll give my best attempt to give a definition before you give the formal definition of it, but it's the notion that God is on the side of the oppressed. So it's blasphemous just from that point alone. The fact is, these people who use the term Black liberation theology, or who say that they are practitioners of Black liberation theology, the onus is really on them, or they kind of claim the onus of deciding who is and who isn't oppressed, right? And so it's not even a genuine kind of outlook, because they're not genuinely looking at people who are oppressed. They're saying that because you are Black, by virtue of the color of your skin, you are automatically oppressed.
Right.
And so God is automatically on your side.
Right.
Never mind what's in your bank account. Never mind that you never experienced racism. Never mind any of that. Just by the sheer fact that you are black, you are oppressed. And so God is automatically on your side. And so again, the whole premise of it is disingenuous. And not only that, it's not even biblical. God is not on the side of the oppressed automatically. He's on the side of his remnant. He's on the side of those who have a contrite heart and who have repented and have decided to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. That is who he's on the side of. The Bible says that in the end, when Christ comes, he will separate the goats from the sheep. And so the question becomes, who is the goat and who are his sheep? The fact of the matter is, your being a goat is not predicated upon what you have materially or what's in your bank account or what white man said something negative against you. Really, the determining factor as to whether you are a goat or a sheep is whether you have repented and have made Christ your Lord. That's the determining factor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but what you have, what they'd say is that what you have materially is what determines your morals, and therein lies the problem. This is why blacks can't be held accountable, or any perceived oppressed group cannot be held to a certain standard of behavior, particularly a biblical standard of behavior, because their conception of morality is filtered through how they experience life, based upon what they own and what they have in their bank account, and the size of the home that they live in, and the neighborhood that they live in, and what have you, instead of who or what you are on the inside, pouring out in creating not so much, not in a manifestation kind of way, but you get what I'm saying. That's why we have to, before we can even deal with the question of sin and morality and everything else, we have to fix the society, because it's not fair to expect, those in the ghetto to be righteous, to live by a standard that the Bible commands you to live by. How can you? They're poor. So we got to fix that first, because it's not the individual that sins, it's the institutions that are sinning, which causes those who are at the mercy of these institutions to act unrighteously.
That reminds me of that video that I sent you guys, where he's talking about how there's no amount of discipline that one can have that can better his plight in life, because the system is still against him.
Who said that?
That video that
The
I
guy
sent
was
y'all.
talking about Joe Clark.
Did you watch it? I texted it to the group, and and I said, like, I would hate to be this man's son, because everything is the system's fault. Everything is somebody else's fault. No responsibility of the individual, none of that. It's somebody else's fault. And so again, this is part and parcel of Black liberation theology.
That's right.
Yeah. That's why it's so, I think that's why watching Justin do all of that, like, I grew up in church. I know church people. I know what that is going to do. I'm not surprised by the Tyler Perry, I'm not surprised. This is just getting started. Oh, it's about, they are so excited that this thing has this much support, and they are loving this because they know what's coming. They know that they are about to, this potentially could be a whole nother May 25th, 2020. Like, this potentially could be another one of these huge, exhausting movements that have people so emotionally charged, where they start to try to change legislation. And to me, it's a problem. Like, this is a problem. And politically speaking, if the Republicans do not, which good luck with that. But I'm just saying, if
Stop
they
putting
don't,
your hope in Republicans.
huh?
Republicans
I
aren't going to
know,
save
man.
anything.
No.
They're just not.
No,
They're
they're
just
not. They're
not.
not. They have no clue how to respond to something like this. They have no clue. But
I
because
have
they
questions.
don't, it's going to grow because they don't know how to respond to it, and they
And
won't respond to it.
Keisha, what? So these 3 Democrats were expelled from the legislature because they participated
2 of them were.
in some type of protest. What happened?
So 3 of them, it was Justin Pearson and Justin Jones and Gloria Johnson, I think her last name is. They're Democrats from Tennessee, and they led a protest. They actually led the protest, and Tennessee.
They didn't lead it.
Huh?
They didn't lead it.
Well,
For sake of conversation, they led it, but they didn't lead it. They had people behind them. But go ahead.
Okay.
I'll stop.
They were
I'll
there
silence
with the
myself. I'll
freaking
mute myself.
Somebody put a
bullhorn.
battery in their back, huh?
Exactly.
Well, they were on the the House floor with a bullhorn. I don't know. I mean, what do you mean? And because when they did that, they in the Tennessee Constitution, it says that there are rules for decorum. And they broke those rules. It wasn't so much that there was a protest; it was because that they were on the floor doing it.
Acting
I
a
mean,
fool.
it's not the first.
Acting a fool.
They went through
I mean,
the well.
literally, just the 2 Justins had the bullhorn. The only reason why this is what they were saying. The only reason why that Gloria didn't get expelled was because she didn't participate as much. She didn't get on the bullhorn. She didn't do all that.
That was the one white lady, right?
That was the white lady.
But that's not the only reason why.
Why the two black? Why they gotta act a fool? And the one white person had enough to say, okay, I ain't doing that now, because I ain't trying to.
And because her colleagues, her colleagues did not vote her out, so now on top of that, they're saying it's a race thing. They expelled the 2 black men and not the white lady. So on top of all, the gun violence that they were supposedly protesting against, now it's turned into it's like it's an LGBTQ issue, and now it's a race issue.
Okay,
so
hold on.
I'm like, oh, this has all the parts.
So what are they upset about? I'm trying to what are they screaming about?
So because of the Covenant shooting, that's what prompted the protest, because they want their Tennessee to have some type to make some type of gun law. They want them to get rid of assault rifles or make some type of gun law, anti-gun law, I guess. And so that was their way doing this protest, was saying we're standing up again for lives. We need, protect the lives, don't protect the guns. Those were some of the signs that you were seeing that they were showing. And this is what started the protest. And then they got expelled because they acted a fool on the congressional floor, which they should have gotten expelled, because that's not, you come in. Justin Pearson's first day of Congress, he came in there in a dashiki, okay?
You rebuke it.
So, and then he was complaining about that. This kid, well, he's 29 years old, but he has been organizing since he was in high school. This is not anything new. This is what him and the Justin guy, they are radical. They are radical. That's why I'm like, people need to wake up. This is not just like some.
Well, to Blanche's point, though, I'll echo what he said about James Cone in terms of, these are 2 funny-looking boys who, again, I'll take it back to Justin Pearson. The guy has an afro, a dashiki. He gets up there and sounds like MLK with a little bit of Malcolm X sprinkled in, and a little bit of A-Trap Brown, and a little bit of again, he's all of the black social justice movements from 1960 to present hour. That's him in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And not only that, but when you look at the video where he's giving that little speech and he's doing all this, that, and the other, if you look at the people who are around him, the black folks who are around him, they are even confused about what's going on, and they are also Democrats.
Right.
So
play that.
again,
I have that clip.
okay.
Everybody's face was stoic. They were just like,
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's a whole trip.
So why you find that the point I wanted
on
to
Friday, the government decided that my Savior Jesus, a man that was innocent of all crimes except fighting for the poor, fighting for the marginalized, fighting for the LGBTQ community, fighting for those who are single mothers, fighting for those who are ostracized, fighting for those pushed to the periphery, my Savior, my black Jesus. He was
Oh my
lynched
God.
by the government on Friday. And they thought that all hope had been lost.
What is going on,
The
man?
outside it rained and it thundered and everybody said everything was over, and it was some black women who stood at the cross. It was some black women who watched what the government did to that boy named Jesus. They were witnesses, as you have been witnesses to what is happening in the anti-democratic state of Tennessee. They were witnesses.
Man.
Lord have mercy.
oh no, you should have finished it because he went to the resurrection. You should have finished it, Keisha, because he ties it into Easter now. Like Resurrection Sunday, he ties it in now.
Yeah, I want to hear. I have it. You want to hear the whole thing?
He ties it into resurrection now.
Yeah, he does.
A whole fool.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. Yeah, let's play the whole thing. So disgusting. I'm so sick of these people.
I just want to ask a point of privilege. Speaker,
Let's.
the God who makes all things possible, who takes the son of teenage parents Kimberly Owens Pearson and Jason C. Pearson and brings them to an institution built by enslaved people's hand. All glory and honor to God, who brings those who've been marginalized and excluded into this place and tells them that you still have a voice, that you still are somebody, and that the movement for love and justice cannot be stopped because we've still got a heartbeat, because we've still got a movement for love that needs us. We've still got people who are calling on us to act and to do something. To all you who still believe that the best days for democracy are ahead, for all of you who still believe that our better days in Tennessee are ahead, I want to tell you that I still believe with you. And how is it that even now amidst persecution,
Yeah, look at the people around him. They're not with it.
our own brother Justin Jones, Representative Jones, gets expelled from the House, is it
waiting for
that
that
we
chicken,
still
that
have
fried
hope
fish,
and faith
waiting
and
to go
belief
eat.
in the democracy of Tennessee, faith and hope in the belief in the democracy of the United States of America? How is it that you still have hope, you descendant of enslaved people? How is it that you still have hope? Well, it's because even from the bottom of slave ships, my people didn't quit. Even in cotton fields and rice fields, my people didn't quit. Even when they were whipped and chained and told they had no name, my people didn't quit. Even when they incarcerated us, locked us up for a crack cocaine epidemic created by President Ronald Reagan to fund a war in South America, my people didn't quit. Even when they defunded our schools, separated us and called us colored and white, even when they put us on lynching trees in the state of Tennessee, specifically in Shelby County,
That's some James Cone right there.
didn't quit. Even now, as our own brothers and sisters lay to rest,
Boy, he got that
because of
cadence
ability of
down,
people
boy.
in positions of power to do something. Because people are refusing to pass just laws to end the epidemic of gun violence in the state of Tennessee. My people have yet to quit. And so even now, amidst this boat, amidst this persecution, I remember the good news. Hallelujah, Jesus. I remember that on Friday, the government decided that my Savior Jesus, a man that was innocent of all crimes except fighting for the poor, fighting for the marginalized, fighting for the LGBTQ community, fighting for those who are single mothers, fighting for those who are ostracized, fighting for those pushed to the periphery, my Savior, my black Jesus, He was lynched by the government on Friday. And they thought that all hope had been lost. All the outside, it rained and it thundered, and everybody said everything was over, and it was some black women who stood at the cross. It was some black women who watched what the government did to that boy named Jesus. They were witnesses, as you have been witnesses to what is happening in the anti-democratic state of Tennessee. They were witnesses to what was going on, and I got to tell you, it got quiet on Saturday. Yes, I tell you, it was a sad day on Saturday. All hope seemed to be lost. Representatives were thrown out of the State House. Democracy seemed to be at its end. Seemed like the NRA and gun lobbyists might win. But oh, that was good news for us. I don't know how long this Saturday in the state of Tennessee might last. But oh, we have good news, folks.
Yeah,
we've got good news that Sunday always comes. Resurrection is a promise, and it is a prophecy. It's a prophecy that came out of the cotton fields. It's a prophecy that came out of the lynching tree. It's a prophecy that still lives in each and every one of us in order to make the state of Tennessee the place that it ought to be. And so I've still got hope because I know we are still here and we will never quit.
Out of order.
The guy behind him looked kind of
out of order.
Oh, look, listen. That's what I was gonna say. Though, so with this shooting by this trans person, this is what all this is about. Because the media doesn't do negative press of the LGBTQP, don't forget X, Y, and Z community. So how do you circumvent them being involved in 4 shootings? You make it about gun violence. You make it about the NRA. You make it about not that group. And so they got this guy, and I believe he's probably in the group. The other guy he was holding hands with is in the group. Like all of these folks, to me, a lot of them are in the LGBTQ movement. And I believe that he's one of them. Like even the guy that was behind him that grabbed his shoulder. Like, so this is one big smoke screen to get this off of them. But also the end goal to me is to get people to give up their guns, and then who's going to have them? My prediction is that the trans community will have them because the trans community is quote unquote being persecuted. They need protection. So now you have the trans with the guns and nobody else has any guns. And we know what that spells. That spells, you know, stick them up. No pun intended.
Could you imagine what that looked like? You being like held up by a trans.
Now listen, you can give me some money, or I'll take other forms of payment. But you know where that goes.
Hey Blanche, I remember you did this live. This was a long time ago. You was doing a live, and you were telling people, you were like, they're gonna make everybody, you know, bow down to the LGBTQ. And somebody in your comments was like, I'm just gonna say I'm LGBT, and you were like, they're gonna make you prove it.
Yeah, they're gonna say prove it.
Like, prove it.
You know, they go in there talking about, you know, I'm for inclusion. I accept the non-binaries, trans, gay, everybody. You know, I love you all. I really do. They'll say, prove it.
Prove it.
Lock the door. Prove it.
Look, they're going to be like Puff back in the, well.
Man, come on.
Be like.
You should start getting into the insider stories about the entertainment industry.
No, they really do. Prove it.
To the point that I
said, go ahead.
Go ahead, Blanche.
He said, I don't know how long Saturday is going to last. I'm like 24 hours.
There's an answer to that question.
All right. It's not a mystery. I mean, look.
Didn't he say, did he say Jesus was lynched? Didn't he say Jesus was lynched on Friday?
Jesus was lynched on Friday.
He said, those black women standing at the feet of that cross. He has it down pat more than I do. I mean, he's well studied on Negro orator cadence. But the thing is, again, if you look at the people who are standing around him, they're not feeling what he, like, they're not picking up what he's putting down in terms of
they're not.
what he's trying to do in that speech. And I think, like, their attitude to that speech in real time is the exact sentiment of literally everybody in the country. And so all of this prestige that just the two Justins and Gloria are getting is literally manufactured. And this is the point that I'm trying to get across, and this is what I want people to take away, is it's manufactured popularity,
Right.
manufactured prestige. And so to Keisha's point, yes, these guys are being looked at as heroes, and it seems like it's very overwhelming. It seems like it's very inundative and like all the support. But again, it's manufactured. They did the same thing with Martin Luther King when he came to notoriety. He was not popular in his day. The black church in the South overwhelmingly rejected him. Especially, again, I tell people all the time, in order to understand Martin Luther King, you first have to understand Joseph H. Jackson. Because King was a break away from Jackson. Jackson was the kind of Booker T. Washington-esque, cast down your bucket where you are, preaching the fundamental gospel. If you want something, it's on you to go get it. It's not the government who's going to do it for you. It's not the white man who's going to do it for you. You do it. And I can't wait to get into some of the sermons that Jackson preached. I have a whole trove of them where he called men to task. He told men in one sermon, he said, if you're not going to be men, you may as well braid your hair and start wearing step-ins. And it was almost prophetic because that's exactly where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
Men with braided hair, and you see, pictures coming out, people like Kid Cudi and others wearing dresses because they think it's fashionable. People like Jaden Smith wearing dresses because they think it's fashionable. And again, Jackson called it in 1960s. If you're not going to be men, start braiding your hair and wearing step-ins. What are the two differences between Jackson and King? Jackson believed in desegregation. King believed in forced integration. And I make this point all the time. What is the difference between desegregation and integration? Well, desegregation takes the power away from the states and the municipalities to enforce, or first of all, to legislate and then enforce segregation on its people, which is unconstitutional. What forced integration does is it gives the federal government the power to go after you as a private business owner for claims of discrimination.
Which is also constitutional.
And so as soon as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is passed, what does Jesse Jackson do? He starts his Rainbow Coalition. He starts, Operation Push, Operation Breadbasket, and all the others. And what he does throughout the 80s and the 90s is he goes after private companies and corporations for not hiring enough black people because you're discriminating against them. He couldn't prove it, but all he could do is look at, okay, this is a company, the majority of their employees are white. It must be because of discrimination. Never mind the fact that the area in which that company is located is mostly white. Never mind any of that. You have to, in a sense, go out of your way to hire black people. Otherwise, you're in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And he won a lot of those cases, again, because what the Civil Rights Act of 1964 did was it gave the federal government the right to go after private business owners for something that was, outside of their control. And so there's a vast difference between desegregation and forced integration. I hope the audience is getting this. But again, when it comes to another difference between Jackson and King, Jackson believed, once again, that it's on the black man to make his own way. Whenever the Negro sharecroppers in the South were getting gypped by a lot of the farmers who they were working under, they were, putting in all this labor and not getting paid for it. What Jackson did with the National Baptist Convention was they resolved to buy, I think, 400 acres of land in the South. And they told these Negro sharecroppers that you can work this land for free, rent-free, and raise money from the selling of your crops. And we encourage you to take that money and go buy your own farmland so you can move from being a sharecropper to an actual farmer. to where you're not having to depend on somebody else to make your own way. And this was working. So what he was doing was practical things in order to help black folks overcome whatever injustices did lie in front of them. That was his approach. What was King's approach? King's approach was going to LBJ, going to the government and asking the government to push laws that will, in a sense, exacerbate and exaggerate things and create even more tension between black and white. And not only that, while he's pushing this legislation, he's in a sense shifting the kind of mindset of the black man to where they're no longer thinking about what can I do to better my situation in life, but rather what can the government do? And so that created this kind of spirit of bitterness, the spirit of covetousness, of envy, where you're coveting over what your neighbor has, what your white neighbor has, what your Asian neighbor has, and you're thinking that I don't have it because I'm black. And so again, as you move into the 70s, into the 80s, the black man becomes more lazy. He's disinterested in raising his own family and raising his own kids and being married to one woman and committed to one woman. And of course, you have a lot more that's going on with that with regard to the rebellion of the woman at the behest of second wave feminism. There's a lot more to it. But again, there was a drastic mindset shift. And who was at the head of it? Martin Luther King, who was made popular not by organic kind of, influence, but rather the, Time Magazine, New York Times, all of these, predominantly liberal, white, and Jewish Marxist publications that were making him the hero. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Remember, they get to choose who are the heroes and who are the villains. They made Martin Luther King the hero, and then it's in Joseph H. Jackson, who was popular in his day. Nobody even knows the name. Nobody even know that man existed. And I tell black folks who profess to be black conservatives or black Republicans, if you don't know who if you don't know who Joseph H. Jackson is, miss me. Because if you are a black Republican or black conservative and you see Martin Luther King as a hero, that tells me everything I need to know about your brand of conservatism.
You just scored it, Chad. I don't even know. I want to follow up, but I just wanted to piggyback on that too, as far as like popularity is concerned. And the same could be said about Malcolm X. He was not popular in the 1960s. There's a man, and he isn't a staunch conservative. He's rather left wing. He's a black man, fairly young. He wrote a book titled "The Black Silent Majority." His name is Michael J. Fortner. It's an interesting book, and he talks about the Rockefeller drug laws and the draconian drug laws and this and that led to mass incarceration. But what Michael J. Fortner highlights in his book, The Black Silent Majority, hence the title, that these draconian drug laws and these harsh sentencing laws that we like to, and I've said this in the past before, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but the laws aren't the problem. I saw Chad. I think Chad was on the show the other day about criminal justice reform or something like that. But the laws are not the problem. The laws were never the problem. Professor Fortner points out in his book that blacks wanted those laws going all the way back to the 1960s, because that's when things began to drastically turn and the agitators began to come into these black areas. Michael J. Fortner points to a 1964 survey where citizens of New York City, particularly the borough of Harlem, were asked blacks how they felt about Malcolm X and others. And Malcolm X had a 6% favorability rating. Only 6% of those surveyed in Harlem, this is Harlem now, in Malcolm X, that only 6% believe that, Malcolm X, what he was doing was actually helping the black community, compared to, it was over 50% thought, and I, Chad and I have spoken about this privately, and Chad and I are both very critical. All four of us have been very critical of the NAACP. There's another interesting book about the NAACP. Chad may have heard of it. Blanche may have heard of it. It was written by Zygmunt Dobbs, titled "Red Intrigue." Talks about how communists were deliberately trying to foment a racial strife in this country, and they were using the NAACP to do it. But Zygmunt Dobbs is of the opinion that the NAACP didn't start out as a communist organization, but it was simply infiltrated. But to go back to Michael J. Fortner's research in this 1964 survey, about over 50% of those surveyed believe that the NAACP had the right plan of action for the Black community. And Roy Wilkins had about from memory serves me correct, like a 22% favorability rating compared to a 6% favorability rating when you start talking about Malcolm X. Because again, once the agitators came in, then what they were doing was they were enabling crime, enabling the chaos. All this talk about, the criminals and what we need to do is we need to fix the social problems, fix the social issues, and then you wouldn't have these problems with crime. And the Black people in New York and in boroughs like Harlem and in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, they were like, no, we want police. It got so bad where Blacks in the 1960s in Harlem began to organize their own militias to try to do the best that they could to police their neighborhoods. And they wanted the likes of Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael and Schnick, who again was the student wing of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, thanks to reprobates like Ella Baker and Howard Zinn. They wanted nothing to do with Malcolm X and Schnick. And they wanted more police and they wanted harsher sentences. It was not this solely this Democrat thing. And it was, the point of it was to incarcerate because Democrats are racist. A lot of conservatives run with that narrative, but that's not entirely true. Michael J. Faulkner, look up his research. It's very interesting.
Chad, you said something earlier that I mentioned in my live about the covetous spirit, about how this whole thing is like we want what they have, this kind of mindset, even with you mentioned earlier, Chuck, when you was like the utopia of we all share the land, but now they have the land. So how do we get our utopia back? We got to take it from the white people to get our utopia back. It's almost like the reversal of getting cast out of the Garden of Eden and then wanting to get back in. But you look in the Garden eating from the outside and there's white people in there enjoying it, why they get to eat the fruit, and so Black folks want to get back in the garden, so to speak. And that's the whole, this whole premise of this theology they have with this, what we call it earlier, we called it liberation theology. That's what I see it is what Chad said with the covetous spirit. Them basically wanting to have what white people have. I talk to Black folks all the time and they think that every white person is rich. And I'm like, that's insanity. I said, people live check. I said, that most folks in America live check to check. They believe that the majority of white folks live the best life ever. And I said, dude, I said, go to West Virginia, go to the outskirts of Georgia, go to any of these places where most poor white folks don't live in the cities. They live more or less out in these rural areas. They don't live in the cities. But again, that's just. But there's one more thing I wanted to say. When you were talking, Chuck, I forgot what it was. Never mind, I forgot.
My bad, Blanche. I think you got your thought.
I think when we talk about like the drug laws and stuff, I completely agree. I remember reading and watching Al Sharpton when he was going through the streets of New York, and they were talking about the crime and stuff like that. Like, I think he was one of the people that was actually trying to, say like, okay, these laws are. I mean, people need something. I can't remember if he was I can't remember what side he was on, but I do remember seeing him in the streets. And I think like with any law, any law can be used by the government. Like right now, like they're using these really they're using these laws against Trump. I mean, they're not using them properly. So you have people in the government who will use laws to go after political opponents, or go after people like Barack Obama. What he was doing was using, misusing the law. And I think in some cases with the drug laws that they were needed. Black people did want them. In some cases, there were people who were being overcharged with crime, like the punishment didn't fit the crime. And I mean, people try to make it seem like this is happening all over the place, and this was the majority of the thing. It wasn't the majority. There's always going to be people, because I can just hear it now. I can hear it in the chat. I don't know if it's happening in the chat. I don't know, but I just anytime you bring this up, people always want to say they were using this to come after Black people. They were over sentencing, and they were over. That was not the majority of what was happening. And I think, again, it's this idea that they take the anomalies and they want to make it seem like that's the majority. Like the Martin Luther King, they take the few people who are supporting Martin Luther King and they want to make it seem like that's the majority. And they have the media, they have control of the government, the control of all these institutions that will push whatever narrative comes down from on high, and it's hard to combat.
Well, one of the things. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Keisha. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, that was pretty much it.
I think. Okay, so let's just be real for a moment, because I hear all the time, oh, drug epidemic, crack epidemic, mass incarceration, all the rest of it. And here's the reality of the matter. The fact is, there is diversity, cultural diversity amongst Black people in America, right? When you look at Baldwin Hills in California, and Chuck, or not Chuck, but Blanche being from California, he might be aware of Baldwin Hills. Baldwin Hills is like the Black, or was the Black Beverly Hills in terms of Black people having money, doctors, lawyers, the whole nine, architects, whatever. There were many such Baldwin Hills all across the United States for the better part of the 20th century. These are well documented not only by Booker T. Washington, but also by W.E.B. Du Bois. Because Du Bois was a kind of what is the word for it? There's a science attributed to it. Sociologist, I think. Mm-hmm. And so he even went around kind of documenting the livelihood of Black folks in America. And so even he documents how Black people, whether it be in different parts of North Carolina, Texas, what have you, were living comfortable middle-class lifestyle. The narrative goes that, anytime Black people were utilizing capitalistic means of being successful, here along came white folks to burn it all down. First of all, that's not true. It's just patently false, for one. And even to the extent that it was true, you will find that there were a lot of communists who were actually behind many of these burning down of businesses, burning down of churches, because they wanted Black folks to unite not with other white Americans, but rather with white communists. And they wanted to kind of beat it into the heads of Black folks that white folks don't want you to succeed. So the Klan is going to always burn down your success, because they wanted to, again, impress upon you this notion that to utilize your skills and talents and, whatever it is that you're blessed with, to utilize that in exchange for capital is the wrong methodology for being successful. The proper way to be successful is, again, you don't own anything, but you're happy, much the same as what the World Economic Forum is trying to convince us of these days. So what happened after you have the LBJ kind of policies that were engineered by people like Cloward and Piven and other kind of Marxist, socialist policymakers, is there became all these incentives to have your provisions provided for you by the government if you have a lot of kids. And so as you get into the 70s, the cast of Black folks who are having a lot of kids are this kind of low income inner city type Black folks, whereas the more kind of affluent and well-to-do Black folks are having less kids. And so the fastest growing population of Black America are this kind of lower echelon inner city Black folks. And so there's more of them and less of the kind of middle class individuals who have, you know, good moral traditional values. That's not to say that poverty equates to low values. Different parts of Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas prove that that's not the case. Poor does not equal a lack of values. However, when you have intermixed into the equation a media who is hell-bent on highlighting this kind of degenerate culture as being Black culture, it impresses upon the minds of many that Blackness equals this kind of degeneracy, debauchery, barbarism, indifference, frivolousness, the whole nine. And so, again, when you look at the crack epidemic, who is selling crack? Who is trafficking in crack? It is these people who are among this influx of children who do not have fathers in their lives. Because a lot of mothers believe that if I have more children, that means more benefits from the government, more provisions from the government. And so why are more and more Black kids being born from this certain subsect of society? There's a number of reasons for that. One is that with the emergence of Blaxploitation, which glorified pimping and hustling and degeneracy, it encouraged this kind of indulgent spirit that a lot of Black men had, where I can have unfettered sex with as many women as possible and not suffer the consequences of A, having to rear those children because the government's going to take care of them. I posted a video earlier, a reel earlier in the week, where Blanche is commenting on it, where you have Black men who are like, yeah, I can have 6 or 7 or 8, 9, 10 kids, and the government's going to take care of it. Well, okay, well, what happens when the government doesn't? Well, I guess it will be a big disaster. Again, there's a lot of Black men who just know that their baby mothers are going to get food stamps, they're going to get a housing voucher, they're going to get all the things for no other reason than the fact that they don't have a father in their life. And it's a win-win for me because I can have sex with whomever I please and not have to bear the burden of raising those kids. And so again, it goes back to the kind of communication that is being leveled upon Black folks in a very inundative way through media, through academia, through social policy, all the rest. And so again, once crack is introduced into the system or into the public, for me, I don't care as much about, well, who is responsible for introducing crack, because that's not the concern for me. The concern is rather, where are your values and why is it that you would indulge in crack in the first place? Because an honorable man, a virtuous man, a man of values will not indulge or engage or entertain the idea of smoking crack. And so again, it comes down to the birth population. Who's having kids? Who isn't? Why aren't they having kids? So on and so forth. And I'll end it by saying this: to the extent that Black folks with traditional values, traditional morals, the middle class Black, they're not having kids, I think is an indictment on them as well. Because, you know, God says, the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. That's what the Bible says. Feminism says that to the extent that you as a woman are having kids, you become a slave to not only your husband, but to those kids as well. And so a lot of these middle class Black women, white women, doesn't matter, begin to listen to and embrace and identify with feminist rhetoric. So you have people who have the means having less kids because they are falling for feminist rhetoric. And you have also the lower value people having more kids because they get a government incentive for having those kids. And so what I'm saying is a very complex thing, but unfortunately, a lot of scholars are either too intellectually lazy to go there with you, or they see the benefit and just chalking it all up to racism because it helps with this kind of Marxist globalist agenda. I'll end it there.
And one more thing, guys, if I may, because I got to escape. I got to take off. Got early. I got to get up early in the morning, so I'm gonna let y'all take it from here. I just want to make one more comment. And I know this wasn't like the core theme of the talk, but y'all know how we do. We just kind of go wherever the spirit takes us. Just on this issue of crack, talking about violence and mass incarceration and everything else. As far as the whole the science of crack, its addictive nature, this whole thing about crack babies and everything. A lot of that, and I don't think I have the time to kind of go back into all of that stuff right now. But a lot of the crack baby stuff, a lot of the science, a lot of that stuff was fudged, manufactured. A lot of that stuff about the effects that crack had on people was not true. But that's just inside. But as far as like the incarceration and everything else, and the biggest problem that came along with the crack era was the violence. When people talk about, well, man, why is there this discrepancy in sentencing? Powder coke versus hard crack is because the crack dealers, it wasn't because the majority of them were black, it was that the crack dealers were more violent. That's what they don't tell. When you listen to, and then Black shaking his head because he knows what I'm talking about. If you listen to some of the crack kingpin, like the real Freeway Rick Ross, the guy AZ, the real AZ, not the rapper. They all said, AZ said, when I first got in the drug game, I was selling coke. He said, I didn't carry a gun. I didn't carry a gun. Even Freeway Rick Ross said it himself. He said, I never felt like somebody was going to hurt me or somebody's going to kill me or rob me, anything like that. Because his clientele, the people that he sold powdered cocaine to, brick cocaine, said these people weren't violent. It was the folks who sold crack that were the violent ones. And so I just want to point that out there that just because and you can question, of course, you can question the morality of somebody that's selling any type of illegal substance, sure. But there's a difference between, I guess, somebody who sell coke to somebody who, in a controlled social environment at a party may do a couple lines and going off about their business versus, bullets flying through homes, innocent babies and children and kids get shot and dead bodies, strewn about all, throughout the street. It's a huge difference. And so that was the issue on why there was a call for a political crackdown on the crack game, because the murder rate skyrocketed. And one more thing, I'm gonna let y'all go. Speaking of AZ, and I know it's a weird source because how we go from talking about this and I'm referencing drug dealers. But again, he said, because he tells the story in the drug dealer AZ, his story is depicted in the movie Paid in Full. His role is played by Wood Harris. He goes by Ace in the film. The movie Paid in Full, for those who don't know, is about AZ, Rich Porter, and Alpo. And AZ said, he was shot in the head twice, I believe, in retaliation. Another drug dealer broke. Anyway, and the person that shot him happened to be the boyfriend of his sister, who went away for a while because he was in the drug game. He came home after doing the bid, and AZ was the man by then. When he came back home, AZ put him on. Said he gave him like 30, 40 grand in his pocket, gave him a car, all this and that. And the envy caused him to do what he did to AZ. Killed him, shot him in the head. He survived, But AZ said something and it stuck with me. He said, man, and if you know Alpo, you know what he's saying is true. He said, I was a kingpin. He said, but I never killed anybody. I never ordered anybody to be murdered because he said it was so much money in the drug game back then. He said there was no reason for anybody to kill anybody. He said if you would have came to me, he said, bro, I would have gave you the shirt off my back. He said I had more money than I could spend. All you had to do was ask me. He said, and that's why he turned state's evidence. Because he said, dog tried to kill me. He said, bro, you didn't have to do me like that, bro. You tried to kill me, bro. He said, I would never do that to anybody. He said, because I was in the drug gang. But he said I could never murder anybody because he said I just couldn't have that on my heart. It was too much money. So all this talk about we killing each other because we just trying to survive and we got to do this and this and that. No, that's a myth. Even the cats that was in the street, that was really in the game, the cats that these rappers model their rap personas after. But it's a rapper named AZ. The real AZ said it was no reason for anybody to kill anybody. They liked killing each other. He said Alpo was a serial killer, man. He didn't have to kill nobody.
You ever seen the Cocaine Cowboys?
No, I haven't. I know I'm familiar with it, but I haven't seen it.
The Colombians in Miami, I think maybe different parts of the country, maybe up north, it was one way. Maybe in the 80s, the Cocaine Cowboys and the Colombians, they didn't have enough. The morgues were always full that the bodies would just be in the streets. So I know you got to run, but
I mean, listen, y'all. I don't get me wrong. I'm not making excuses. All I'm trying to say is that again, it's that's not the case. Even again, Lucky Luciano and Arnold Rothstein. Arnold Rothstein is the so-called CEO of crime. Was Charlie Luciano's mentor. Said y'all got to stop all that Tommy gun shooting each other. Y'all got to stop all that. Luciano said, no, man, we need to organize crime if we want to be successful because we cannot be involved in these squares. Because they're going to go to the government. They pay taxes. They pay police for their protection. And our pockets ain't that deep. So we have to make the streets safe so that we can operate, keep it quiet. No women, no children, no people who are outside the culture. If he ain't involved, if he a square, leave him alone. Goes back to the old question: is there honor amongst thieves? I guess in a sense there used to be, but when it got to crack with the Negroes in the 70s and the 80s, all hell broke loose because they already had no honor. So that's it, dog.
Well, thank you so much, Chuck. As always, you are always add so much value to these conversations.
All right, y'all, man.
We'll start on time next time, Chuck.
Nah, it's all good, man. It's all good. Peace out, y'all.
Bye.
And everybody in the chat.
All right.
Yep.
I want to piggyback on what Chuck said, and that's what I was actually going to say. I was going to say that the reason why the sentencing like what it was because of the culture that crack brought. Most people that sold drugs to other communities, they wouldn't flood their own community with drugs, meaning that they wouldn't sell drugs to the neighbor next door. They wouldn't sell drugs to their mother. When crack came, everybody was fair game. Children, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, nobody was off limits with crack. And to me, just from a moral standpoint, it created a different kind of demon, so to speak. When you have not just the violence, but also who they were selling the drugs to. Then you add the violence. Then you add the children. But then you also add, nobody was selling crack to feed their family. Nobody was selling crack to better their community. People were selling crack to be like the biggest drug dealer. So the guy, like even in on my next door neighbor, a guy named Green Eyes had cars, motorcycles, had a bunch of guys working for him. So he was like a young kingpin, like you aspired to be. That's what made the drug game appealing, was like we mentioned earlier, coveting. You seeing this guy with these gold chains, these cars, these women and all this stuff, and you want it. But how do you get it? it's going to be almost impossible for you to try to sell dope to get it, because he has this block, he has this block. So how you going to get it? You got to take somebody out. And so that escalates the violence. Nobody wants to talk about the culture that came with crack cocaine. It's not like selling cocaine in the club. It's not like selling drugs at parties. It's not like going to the frat house and selling drugs. We're talking about you're selling drugs in a housing project with other guys that are selling drugs. What's going to happen? You stepping on somebody's toes. It's like you see a mother that's pregnant, but you still give her crack. Like, all this stuff matters to me when it comes to why crack was looked at so differently. And they can say it was a government conspiracy. They can say it was intentional and all this. I'm just saying, even if it was all intentional, where was the honor though? There was no honor nowhere in the crack era. There was nobody said, we're not going to sell crack over here. We're not going to sell crack on Sundays. We're not going to sell crack around the school. We're not going to give the kids to sell. Like, there's no honor in the crack game. So to me, what happened in the crack era was deserved, because we take the morality away from the people when we say that black folks didn't have a choice, but they did. I remember one time we were all in front of Green Eye's house, and he had popped the trunk, and we just saw all these automatic guns in the trunk. And then one of the guys, he pulls one of them out, and he points it at us. And Green Eye said, "Man, what you doing?" Like, just think about this. Now we're young, and this guy pulls a machine gun out and points, trying to scare us. He's like, "Man, what you doing?" He said, "Put that up, man." But it's just that kind of recklessness that crack brought. You had guys that were like 18 years old making all this money, 19 years old, or even 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All this money, all this power, all this leverage, not even fully developed yet. What does that create? And so we can talk about the government, we can talk about the plots, but we also got to talk about the culture of the people that would even allow it. You couldn't go to the Chinese community selling crack like that. You couldn't go to the Italian community selling crack. Like, you couldn't go to certain communities and push that stuff in their community because they wouldn't allow it. Mm. Now, you could sell drugs outside of that community, but not in their community. So that's all I really had to say about the whole crack era. I agree with Chuck.
Yeah, it was, I grew up in Connecticut, and, in high school, there was kids that sold dope, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, there were. And then when I moved to New York, and I lived in the Bronx, and I lived in the hood, and I would see the guys, like selling dope. And the one thing that stuck out to me, I was like, Black people sell dope so different from white people. Like, I used to tell, my homeboys on the block, I'm like, look, let me give y'all some game. The white boys in Connecticut, when they sell their dope, right, they got their little backpack, and they go to Johnny's house, and they say what's up to Mom, and they're like, oh, hi, and then they go in the basement, and they do whatever. In the hood and in the Bronx, y'all are on the corner, and you're wondering why the police are like targeting you. You're like, hello, police officers, we're selling dope. I was like, y'all sell dope stupidly. And they were, obviously, I don't come from that type of environment or anything like that, but it's like being around it and just watching. I'm just like, why would you do that? You're literally standing on the corner. People are coming up to you like every 5 minutes. Everybody knows what you're doing. And then, the cops run up on you or whatever. And yeah, you're going to jail because what are they supposed to do? Just let you just flagrantly disrespect the law like that? Like, have a little bit of decorum. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to sell dope, at least do it where you're not going to be like, don't sell dope, everybody. Like, that is a bad idea. Do not do it. I would just, why would you do it like that? And then you want to, cry and complain about police and you're, being over policed. And every single block is, it's at least one person. I mean, because, it's very territorial. So there's at least one person on the block that's like,
man, Keisha, it'd be 15 dudes out there selling dope. Stop, Keisha.
Well,
They
okay, well,
all
there might be. Well, I'm saying, like one guy, and it might like be his people, but it's not going
yeah,
to be
but
like
it's
another supply. Another someone that's not under one territory, I guess. But yeah, it is a bunch of them out there, but it's just so stupid. Like if you want to do this, and at least I don't know. I'm not condoning that. I'm not. I'm really not. I want to make that clear. But I'm just saying it was so obvious. Like, yeah, they're going to come and arrest you because you're literally, selling this to people. I remember I was coming out of my building, and this lady, she came up to me with her baby in a stroller, and she asked me to watch her child while she went to go buy crack. Like, you don't like.
Did you
I
do
could
it?
have been, huh?
Did you do it?
Yes, I did it. I'm like,
you
I was like
enabler.
20 years old. I'm like, okay.
That Keisha, that was white supremacy.
How was that white supremacy? She was black.
Because you aided in the mother going to smoke crack. I'm just,
Yeah.
but you know
sure
what's
did.
crazy? But you know what's crazy though, is that we don't talk about where the culture has to be for crack to do that. Like it's impossible for it to do that if you're not already compromised. Like you can't go from we all unified
Exactly.
to hold my baby while I smoke crack. It's impossible. There has to already have been a level of compromise. And you know and I know when them guys are selling dope, they selling dope all on the corner. I would love to see the statistics on how many complaints the police got from all these people selling drugs in their community. I guarantee the phone was ringing off the hook of people complaining about these people shooting and selling drugs and bringing crime into the neighborhood and dope fiends walking around. Like, I can guarantee the police was like, we got to do something. So people never factor in all the folks that didn't smoke crack, all the folks that didn't sell crack, all the folks that wasn't violent, all the folks that worked every day. Like, them people was complaining.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that ties into like what we've been talking about tonight. What happens before the big brouhaha? All of this little Justin thing, all this black, these civil rights activists and all, these Marxists. What happens? This is I'm curious to see what this looks like in 10 years. What does this thing birth if it's not quelled?
Well, the answer to that question is it's going to birth exactly what those who are popularizing Justin Pearson intend for it to birth. Namely, that he is the kind of next Martin Luther King. I mean, BLM had a good ride. They were able to raise billions of dollars on the back of people like George Floyd, Philando Castile, Michael Brown, such and so forth. They were able to raise a lot of money, and they were able to do that by a number of ways. Namely, that they blindsided the GOP. The GOP fell for it. I mean, Rush Limbaugh, who is considered one of the kind of paramount radio personalities, conservative radio personalities, he's no longer with us, of course, but he went on, the Breakfast Club and was, appeared to be kind of groveling toward, to Charlemagne and that whole crowd, and help me to understand, what's going on with the Black community. Why is it like, and so like it was very off-putting, and there were a lot of quote unquote Republicans and conservatives who were sounding much like the left, the quote unquote left, because they didn't know how to make sense of the whole George Floyd ordeal. Never mind the fact that this was an unemployed drug addict who was trying to use fake money, and these rookie officers who weren't able to apprehend him needed somebody like Derek Chauvin to come in and basically hold him down until, the EMTs were able to get there. Like, all common sense goes out the window, and we go with the rhetoric because the rhetoric has been pushed for a long time. And so when it comes to George Floyd happening, an 8-minute video, the general public have no other means of understanding that video other than deferring to the rhetoric and the narrative that has been pushed for a very long time, namely that there's a problem with systemic racism, and this George Floyd situation proves exactly what the critical race theorists and others have been saying for a very long time. And so you had a lot of white people, and you had a lot of, just basically the general public capitulating to this narrative because they didn't know any other way to deal with the situation. The people who are considered on the right side of reasoning are people like, whether it be Coleman Hughes, John McWhorter, Greg Lowry, others who they sound intellectual because they are, professors at Ivy League schools. Most of them are. But again, like they, in a sense, kind of give a nod to this kind of hyper academic justification for systemic racism. And so they would agree to a lot of what the left says, but again, they will differ with them on certain things. And so as such, we consider them as conservatives, when in reality, many of them themselves are atheists. Many of them themselves are individuals who agree with a lot of the narrative and a lot of the preconceived notions that the left has put out. And so it's very rare that a voice like mine or Blanche's or Chuck's or yours, Keisha, who are saying like, well, no, your premise is wrong, therefore your conclusion is wrong. The common sense is a rarity in this day and age. I invite people to defer to the old folklore, the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, which I tell the story all the time, but the Emperor's New Clothes is so important because it explains almost to a T exactly what's going on. Namely that there has to be some voice among the crowd who can call out what's going on for what it is, who isn't willing to basically yield to the narrative, but to basically have enough common sense and enough courage to call out what's actually going on. Namely that when it comes to this idea of systemic racism, it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. We spoke earlier in this live about how Black people are kind of given a pass for being degenerate. Black people are kind of given a pass for not actually putting in the work for what they say they deserve. This word reparations is becoming more and more popular as states like California are beginning to push reparations, and they actually are on the verge of actually implementing regulation that will, at least in San Francisco, give people a nominal paycheck for no other reason than being Black and having lived in San Francisco for 13 years, right? And so what you'll begin to see is this notion of reparations becoming more and more popular, especially in the next election. People like to criticize Joe Biden because he's not doing anything in regard to in regard to reparations. The Democrats are very crafty, and what they're going to do is, as you get into 2024, you're going to begin to embrace reparations because they save this kind of controversial legislation or this controversial issues for the next election because they know that it will galvanize people to vote for them and to vote for their cause. And so that's the only reason why they're not saying a lot about it now, because they're saving it for the next election. But that's neither here nor there. The reality is when you consider who are the voices that the mainstream media says are the credible voices on the right side of American politics. Again, it's these kind of hyper intellectual voices like, again, John McWhorter and Greg Lowry and what's his name? Hughes.
Coleman.
Coleman Hughes. And again, I don't have anything against those guys, but again, they aren't true conservatives in the sense of basing their ideology and their worldview in Christian principles, because they're not Christians, they're atheists. By their own admission, they're atheists.
Yeah, they are.
And so again, I think that they have a lot of positive things to say, but again, they yield to the basic premise of the left. And so
didn't Coleman Hughes, he voted for Joe Biden.
Not only did he vote for Joe Biden, but he endorsed Joe Biden publicly.
Like, what in the world? I stopped listening to his material, to his content, when he started saying that he thought it was good. First of all, when I found out that he was an atheist, not that, I mean, I do converse with people that are atheists, but it wasn't just that. It was like, he was an atheist, and then he was like promoting doing some drug. He was promoting this new, I don't know, drug thing. I'm like, what the frick is wrong with this kid? Like,
he's an atheist, but not only that, but he's a self-described humanist. And I mean, Keisha, you're into education. You know who John Dewey is. John Dewey was one of the signers of the original Humanist Manifesto. And so again, this stuff is worth paying attention to, because what a humanist believe is that an individual can be good without God. That's what a humanist believe in principle, that a person can be good without God.
Right.
Well, if it's God who defines what good is, I mean, literally, if you read Genesis, the Bible says that when God created everything, he said it was good. And if it wasn't good, he didn't move on to the next thing. He didn't move on to the next day. He created the light. He said it was good. And then he moved on to the next day. He created man. He said it was good. And he moved on to the next day. And then he rested. And so goodness and what is good is defined by God. If we define goodness by anything other than God, then we're wrong. We're blasphemous in a sense. And so for a humanist to say that individuals, human beings, can be good without God, that's very Tower of Babel-esque. That is trying to build a utopia, build nirvana without any kind of consideration of what God's word requires, of what God requires of man, of what God requires of the world, what God requires of humanity. And it's only God's remnant, it's only the repentant, it's only the contrite of heart who can understand what the Holy Spirit, which is in harmony with the scriptures, intends to speak to us with regard to what is good and what is evil. And so, again, while I can respect to a certain degree people like McWhorter, people like Hughes, people like Lowry, in terms of some of the commonsensical things that they espouse, I can only take that so far, because to the extent that they disbelieve in God, they will definitely fall short on a number of issues, including George Floyd, including Michael Brown, including all the others, because they believe in such a thing as systemic racism. You know what I mean? They believe in the kind of necessity of the civil rights movement. All these things. So basically, they yield to the very premises of leftism, where I say that I disagree with your premise, therefore I disagree with your conclusion. How can I agree with your conclusion when I disagree with your premise, if that makes sense? So anyway, when you look at people like Hughes and McWhorter and Larry, these are the individuals who the gatekeepers allow to come on to Good Morning America, to come on to, Real Time with Bill Maher, to come on to, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and all the others, to promote their books, because they say, like, okay, I can't agree with people like Larry Elder, people like Vodi Bakum, because they're too extreme, but I will accept, these intellectual type, quote unquote Black conservatives, because they first and foremost disagree with the prestige and the loftiness of our academic institutions. But the fact of the matter is, our academic institutions are far from God. They believe in the truity and the beauty of the sciences and the arts, and they disregard entirely the theology. You know what I mean? Prior to the Enlightenment, the way that man considered their stake in reality first and foremost was theology. It's as A.W. Tozer said, what you believe about God is the most important thing about you. The Enlightenment thinkers rejected that. They disagreed with the concept of God in itself. And so they believe that the way to reason, first and foremost, was through the sciences and through the arts. And John Dewey kind of carried the sentiment well into the 20th century. And unfortunately, a lot of these so-called Black intellectual conservatives, they agree with John Dewey on that basic premise. And so to take it all back to this original conversation, they do little, by they I mean the intellectual Black conservatives, they do very little to challenge the basic premises of leftism in America, which is ruining our country. And they would yes and amen and place their stamp of approval on people like Martin Luther King, on people like Malcolm X, on people like all these others who, in a sense, drastically shifted the mindset of the Black man from being that of an entrepreneur, that of a husband, that of a leader, to that of a complainer, to that of a perpetual baby daddy, to that of a degenerate, crack-selling, useless male, right? Because there's a difference between a male and a man, right? You can be a male in the sense that you have a penis dangling between your legs, but it's an entirely different thing to be a man. I get my concept of what it means to be a man from the Bible, not from the world, not from humanism, but from the Bible. And again, we have to make the Bible relevant again, because this culture, this society has rendered the Bible out of existence. I'm unashamedly, unabashedly extremist when it comes to the Bible. That's what I stand on unapologetically. And so again, if you want to dismiss me for standing on that, so be it. If you're going to dismiss me as a researcher, as an intellectual, whatever the case may be, because I stand on the Bible, I'm okay with that, because I know my Redeemer lives. I know on Judgment Day, when I stand before my God, I know that I'm going to be approved as his good and faithful servant. I don't want to sacrifice my stake with my God because I'm trying to appeal to the intellectual class or to this cultural or worldly class who says that the only way that I will be considered as someone who can be taken seriously if I stand on reason alone or logic alone, more so than what the Bible says and what God, I mean, because this is his world, right? Like God is the literal author of morality, of goodness, of excellence. God is of decency. He's the author of it. And so to pretend that his word doesn't matter when it comes to having these kinds of conversations is just asinine and foolish. But there's a lot of people, unfortunately, like Coleman Hughes, like Lowry, like McWhorter, who believe that you can reason without, and even Matt Walsh, who produced What is a Woman, right? He's a Catholic, and he made the argument that, well, I don't necessarily need to bring up God or religion to make the point that I'm trying to make in terms of this whole transgender argument. That's a very foolish thing to say. It just is.
I think that's from Ben Shapiro. I've heard Ben Shapiro say that before, like, oh, you don't really need to bring up the Bible when you're arguing with, leftists or something like that. Looking at Matt's other content, it was very odd for him not to bring it up during What is a Woman. So I think that was from somewhere else. I don't think that was his idea. I could be wrong.
He wanted it to be appealing. He wanted it to be appealing to everybody. So he knows that bringing up the Bible or bringing up God is going to turn some folks away. I mean, it was a business move. It's almost like, I'll say the obvious. I don't know what happened.
Oh, no, you're still going. Go ahead.
Oh, my bad, Keisha. I'm sorry. Well, I saw Chad's unplugged. I thought I was okay. But Chad had mentioned something, and he mentioned about everybody was basically agreeing with the George Floyd thing, the premise of it, right? I liken the George Floyd situation to what I call the LeBron syndrome. The media, the LeBronisexuals, and everybody is trying to get him to be the GOAT. So they're looking for this one moment to say, okay, this is what makes him the GOAT. And this happens about 4 times a season, every year, where they try to pick this defining moment to say that LeBron is the GOAT. This past one was when he passed the Kareem for the all-time scoring record. They say, okay, now this makes him the GOAT. It's the same thing. He's not the GOAT, but it's the same thing. He's not even the lamb. He's like like what is another kind of lower tiered hoofed animal?
A zebra?
Nah, he ain't a zebra.
A donkey?
Nah, he not like donkeys. He ain't a donkey. He's a lower, whatever's a lower tiered hoofed
A
animal.
mule.
A what?
A mule.
A mini horse.
A mini, yeah, okay. Yeah, he's like a little miniature
pony.
Yeah, a pony. He's a pony. But
At a circus.
At a circus, yeah.
Oh my God, I don't know why that's so funny to me.
But it's the same thing when it comes to racism, right? They're looking for this moment to justify systemic racism. They can't really prove it. They can't really see it, but it's a narrative behind it. It's propaganda behind it. So they're looking for this defining moment to say, okay, this proves there's systemic racism. To me, that moment came with George Floyd. And it came with George Floyd because here you had a police officer, and it was George Floyd sitting there, well, not sitting there, but on the ground, and this happened for like over 8 minutes. So this was enough time for this to soak in everybody's psyche, everybody's subconscious, everybody to get the point, everybody to run through their emotions, all this stuff, and then you keep playing that same scene over and over again, and now we have our defining moment for racism. The same we have this defining moment for LeBron James. They can't quite find the moment, but they said it was when he beat Golden State. But anyway, but my point is, their goal is to find a moment that they can encapsulate and keep for history to say, this moment right here proves that America is systemically racist. They can't use slavery because most folks weren't around during slavery, and it's too far away. You can talk about it in narrative, you can talk about it, but you can't really bring it to modern time. They say, well, what about criminal justice and all that? That doesn't work. They need a moment, an emotional moment, to get folks to agree with this whole systemic racism. To me, it's the George Floyd. But now the new movement is the trans movement. So what's the movement to get the trans community? What's their defining moment to say, okay, this is how we know that there's systemic transphobia, I guess. There's systemic transphobia against the trans. So to me, to people that was off of what Chad said, they're looking for the moments. They're not looking for statistics. They're not looking for proof. They're looking for the moments. January 6th. These are moments. Forget the context. Forget the nuance. Forget the facts. Forget the cameras. Forget all that. They're looking for the moments because they know that most people aren't going to care about statistics. They're not going to read. They're not going to investigate. They just want to see the moment. And this is dangerous, as Keisha's been saying, because that guy giving that sermon is a moment. Even though it's contrived, even though it's horrible acting, even though it's a bad costume, even though it's all these things, it's still a moment. It's still a moment to keep getting replayed and replayed. You take clips from it, you make it go. It's just a moment. Yeah. And so in this social media era that we're in, these are the things that count. It's these moments. Like, y'all on here spitting facts, truth, doing research. It don't even matter to people. They're like, I don't care about that. You can prove it. You guess what? You all would win in court. Keisha, Chuck, and Chado would actually win the case in court. They don't care about that. They care about the moment. The moments define the agenda, the movements, the propaganda. So I just want to say that.
And they know that.
They know.
Yeah, because they appeal to the low IQ of society. And again, Keisha, you talk about this all the time. It's the reason why they have this kind of deliberate agenda to dumb down the American population. They just do. They don't teach comprehensive phonics or intensive phonics. They don't teach civic responsibility. And again, I don't even blame the schools as much as I blame the parents, because it's your job as a parent to ensure that your kids are properly educated. It became a matter of convenience to just, take your kids to public school and trust that these high school educators who are just graduating from high school themselves, they don't even have kids themselves. Again, I'm going to do a study. I'm going to do a research paper where I polled to see just how many of your public school educators in high school have kids themselves. Because I think it was you, Keisha, who earlier talked about how, your daughter was told by her high school educator that all communism is everybody shares the land, right? I'll venture to say, and I may be wrong, but I would venture to say that she doesn't herself have kids, and so,
she's no longer at that school.
Oh, okay. But even still, I mean, she's not the one kind of boogeyman, because people like her are all across the breadth and width of American public school education. People who don't have kids, they are indoctrinated in college. They immediately go and take a job as a public school educator, and then they teach your children exactly what they learned by their Marxist professors in college. And so it becomes this kind of repetition of this kind of Marxist ideology, and you wonder why your teenage children are rebellious against you, why they think you're lame, why they don't want to associate or to carry on your traditional values into the future as far as their own families are concerned, because they are set against you, once again, by the culture and by the education system. And so that's something that I think we as parents, like, that's our responsibility. But again, left to the schools, your children are being actively taught the ways of Marxism, to be hostile toward traditional values, toward Christianity, toward the constitutional republic. They are trained to be favorable toward Marxism, even though they might not identify it as that name, Marxism. They simply are favorable to the principles and the tenets of Marxism, even though they may not recognize it by that in name. And so that's the reality of the situation. It's on us. The Bible says that we are to teach these things to our children and to our children's children, that we are to write these things on our doorposts, that we are to basically recite them on the daily. That's what the Bible says. And it's not what Chad O. Jackson says, it's what the Bible says, right? The Bible says to train up your child in the way that they should go, and when they are older, they will not depart from it. That's certainly true of me. Even though I didn't go to a doctrinally sound church growing up, I went to a heretical church, the Church of God in Christ. The fact of the matter is, I did learn at least the basic tenets of the gospel. And when I became older, I did not depart from it, because it was preached to me from a babe. If we are not doing that as individuals who are rearing children, who are born, who are having children and raising children, but rather we are punting that responsibility to the state by way of the school, we can't then turn around and wonder why our children are so rebellious against us. We just can't. And so the fact of the matter is, the reason why the Justin Pearson moment, as Blanche just said, as he just perfectly articulated, the reason why that moment works is because that moment, I guarantee you, will be in textbooks across the country. Remember that one time in Tennessee when the Tennessee Three, they already gave it a name. The Squad, they already gave it a name. Right? They give these things, these catchy names, these catchy slogans, so they can then turn around and teach it to your children who were not born in 2023. They maybe have been born in 2024 or 2025, but their only recollection to history is through the textbooks that tell you that Justin Pearson was a hero who dared to stand up for justice in the state house of Tennessee on behalf of children who are being gunned down in their schools. Never mind the fact that the shooter was himself a trans person. Never mind any of that. All that you need to know is that this was a hero, a civil rights hero, who in the same tradition as MLK dared to stand up and speak and break the quorum on behalf of the people. These are the people, once again, who choose the heroes and who choose the villains. If you as a parent are not willing to stand up and teach and educate your children with regard to the truth, then there is no future for this country at all.
Amen.
Amen.
As we wrap it up here, I'll just give my final remarks and then I'll pass it over to Blanche. And then Chad, of course, if you want to have some final words. I'm really grateful to be a part of Cutting Through the Culture, because this will go down in history as at least some voice against those who think that the Tennessee Three or Justin Pearson and all of these people were doing something right. At least, I am proud that the history books will have our names there saying there were some who was like, no, absolutely not. Because, I'm with you, Chad. It's the Bible for me. It is, and I will stand 10 toes down, flat-footed. I don't care what, we better get ready, because as the Bible says, you will be persecuted for your faith. And that's what the Bible is clear. Jesus is very clear when you sign up on this is what it is. And so it is what it is. And so, but I will say the parents themselves are dumbed down. So they don't even know, they have no freaking clue that they don't even know what Marxism is. Clearly, the teacher, most people have no clue because they were indoctrinated. They went through the public school system. They went through the government schooling. They have no clue. They don't know that they are I didn't know. I had no idea that I was participating in the thing that prompted me I knew what critical race theory was, but the next question I had was, how did something like critical race theory come into America? That question, because it's so antithetical to the American idea. So I was like, that's when I started digging. That's how I found out about, how the American education system started. But if you're not a thinker, if you're not a person that is curious, if you're not, a person that's seeking knowledge, and, you kind of know something is wrong, and you don't really know how if you don't know how to think, because that is a thing, like knowing how to think, you will be left. You won't know what to look for. These people they don't know logic. They don't have wisdom because they don't have a God. They don't even make the connection between this whole thing about that's going on with the Justin Pearson and just all of the Civil Rights Act and things like that. They don't make the connection. Nobody stops to think like, okay, if the Civil Rights Act was so great and wonderful, why in the freak are we still fighting about this stuff? Like, nobody has thought, like,
you can't legislate love. As Denzel Washington said, you can't legislate love. And the thing is, like, Martin Luther King was such a fraud, such a fake, such a disgrace. And again, it's like, he's not taught as that. He's taught as this hero. He's taught as this pastor. He's taught as this moral leader. He was an adulterer. He was a coke-addicted womanizer, plagiarist. I mean, the thing is, this is just what he was. I'm not trying to besmirch him. I'm not trying to be ugly toward him. This is just a fact of who he was. And he was a Marxist. But again, because he gave a couple of speech,
and he was not a Christian.
He was not a Christian. He didn't believe in God. And so the thing is, But the thing is, like, you know, anytime I post anything about MLK, there's people that get into my comment section and says, well, he was still a good man. He did a lot of good things. And my question becomes, well, what good things are you referring to? Literally, he only gave speeches. That's all he did. He gave speeches. So when you say he did a lot of good things, please tell me what those good things were.
And
he marketed in ideas. He marketed in rhetoric. He marketed in speech. I own a plumbing company. I physically do things with my hands. My employees, they physically do things with their hands. I know people. I have colleagues. I have friends who physically do things with their hands. They do things. When you tell me that Martin Luther King did a lot of good things, please tell me what those were. Please tell me. I'm all ears. You can't say that a man who gave speeches, which A, were plagiarized, which B, were written by his communist advisors, you can't tell me that that person did a lot of good things, because when I look at the tangible results of what he did, namely the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which gave the federal government a right to come into your private-owned company and tell you how to run that company, you can't tell me that was a good thing. You just can't. So again, for those of you who are in my comment section telling me that Martin Luther King did a lot of good things, I invite you, I beg you even, please tell me what those things were. I'm all ears.
He gave us moments. He got people's heads knocked off with bricks and billy clubs. He got people bit by dogs. He got
children.
He got hit by water. Like, and it's funny that the irony of King saying that he's nonviolence, but he's using violence to make a point. He wasn't nonviolent. If he's putting you in harm's way, that's not nonviolence. If he's telling you to go into this establishment and get your head knocked off, that's not nonviolence. You're using violence to push a message. You're just the one not getting violated. And then when we see him getting arrested, he taking a photo op picture. He posing, hat still on. He
with
looking
fedora.
Like, so again, I don't really buy any of it, because I know that if you watch, I love watching like the DC comic movies. In the DC comic movies, the people always hate the real heroes. The public hates the real heroes. They never like the real heroes.
That's true.
Because the real heroes go against the actual establishment. So the real hero is going to test your character and your morality. The prompted up ones aren't. So Superman always ends up getting hated by the world. Batman always ends up getting hated. As bad as Gotham City is, the people still manage to bypass the Joker and go right to Batman and say he's the problem. So the real heroes never get accepted by the world. And like Chad mentioned earlier, that's why they create the heroes. They create them. And the fact that we sit here and praise these folks let you know they're not real heroes, because the real heroes go unsung. You don't see the real heroes. They don't ride off into the sunset with people clapping. No, the real heroes die with doing a whole bunch of work that folks try to cover up. Folks try to cover up the real heroes, try to silence the real heroes. They try to build a narrative and history around the real heroes. So again, it's just this Justin Pearson thing. I know, like you said, Keisha, it's just going to get bigger and bigger, because, and I agree with Chad O, it's not really a real thing, but it really doesn't have to be for it to blow up. Like Black Lives Matter, what did it do? What did Black Lives Matter do? Nothing. But they made all this money, all these T-shirts, all these events, all these engagements, all these protests, all of this stuff, and at the end of what they do, absolutely nothing. And so at the end of the day, y'all mentioned the teachers. And I remember when I was in education, they had this thing called Teach for America. And when you were talking and y'all were talking, I was thinking, I guarantee the person that ran Teach for America was an extreme liberal, probably Marxist, probably and they're just sending out thousands of young educators into all these inner cities to teach all these children. Because I remember we used to get fresh out of college. I mean, like 22. What do you know about anything at 22 years old? Absolutely nothing. But you're teaching inner city children with behavior problems, behind in grade level. It's just like a lot to deal with. And so, I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on the whole education and
Yeah.
faith leaders.
Well, I apologize for the sound. I tried my best throughout the show to fix that. Thank you all so much in the chat, the moderators, Lady T, Angel. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for doing what you do for us, with us. Thanks, Chad, for letting me moderate. I don't know if I'll like volunteer. Well, if I'll accept this challenge again, but I gladly pass it back to you.
No, you did a great job, and I appreciate you for moderating. It's good to just be able to answer questions and to engage in that way. I will say that I saw in the comment section somebody asking, like, "Hey, can we as the audience members participate in the conversation?" I will get around eventually to allowing for people to call into the show. Maybe in the last 30 minutes or an hour to ask questions to individuals on the panel. This is a phenomenal panel. Everybody adds great insight and perspective to the conversation. You have Chuck, who is well researched, who is just a nerd. He's a bigger nerd than I am, and it's just phenomenal in terms of just bringing up the historical context to the kind of conversations that we have. You have Chuck, who is just natural. I'm sorry. You have Blanche, who rather is naturally witty, is just funny, is just common sense, like is just no nonsense. Like Blanche is just, I mean, for me, like I said, I used to watch a lot of Kevin Samuels when he was still alive, and whenever he died, that was just a travesty. But I feel like Blanche basically just took up that baton, but he's even better than Kevin Samuels because he's actually a Christian. Like Kevin Samuels, I believe he was a nominal Christian in terms of like saying that he believed in God.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of deficiencies in terms of some of the things that he talked about. Blanche is actually like, he's actually that. He actually has a contrite heart. He actually has fidelity to the scriptures. And he calls Black culture for what it is. He talks about relationships. He talks about Blackness. He talks about what's going on in the world. So for me, Blanche is actually a step up from Kevin Samuels. So I'm just grateful to have him to, as an addition to this panel. You have Keisha, again, somebody who's common sense, who's a feminine voice, who believes in traditional woman, who believes in traditional values. It's just awesome. And then for me, I don't know what I bring to the table, but hey, I'm here. And all of you who are in the comment section, you are basically family. And so I appreciate you for watching this show. I appreciate you for what you contribute to the show. And I do want to add your voice to the show. So for that reason, I will be adding a call-in section moving forward. I just got to figure out how to do that so you guys can participate. But yeah, thank you, Keisha, for moderating. I think you did a phenomenal job. I mean, I think the sound is a little weird, but we'll figure that out.
And let me say this, Keisha. I would say that Chad asked where he fits in. You think about the Avengers, right? Chad, you probably like Captain America, Yeah, I'm saying, if we look at you got Captain America, you got Iron Man, you got the Hulk, you got Thor, you got the main crux of the Avengers. You probably like Captain America because you like the leader, So yeah, you kind of put this stuff together. So I mean, you're also an historian and a scholar, but you're also a leader because you all take initiative with all this stuff. So you actually are the captain of the ship, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you saying that, especially coming from you, Blanche.
Yes. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. We love you for watching. We will see you next Sunday at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time.